All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. The intent of this call is to convene the ITN negotiations strategy team. And what we are tasked to do today is to determine how we are going to effectively negotiate with the three respondents that we have, that the evaluation team has brought forward for consideration to complete the needs assessment. So I have now called the meeting to order. This meeting is a closed strategy meeting. However, it will be made public soon. So my request to all of you, and it's something that Holly just reminded us, as you speak, please speak clearly into the microphone so that everybody could hear what it is that you are going to say or that you will need to say. Our next thing is that we want to approve the agenda. So
Madam Chair,
yes, ma'am.
before we continue, can we do a roll call of who's present in the room?
Please, absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, I guess I'll do it. Sorry. Community Representative Neil Skeen.
Present.
Community Representative Mr. Walter Stocks.
Present.
County Commissioner Carolyn Cummings.
Here.
Chairperson Dr. Zandra Glenn.
Present.
Also serving on the committee is School Board Member Daryl Jones, who is expected to join us later. And then for guests that are in the room, if you could identify yourselves for the record. Could you turn the microphone on? Sorry.
Liza McFadden.
And Terrence Watts.
And Fred Springer.
And staff are also present, Mr. Ted Granger and Ms. Holly McHale. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, we do have multiple people that are here in the room. The formal members of the negotiation teams are myself, Walter Sachs, Commissioner Carolyn Cummings, and also Neil Skeen, Attorney Neil Skeen. They are the official negotiation team.
Daryl?
And Daryl. Yes, and Daryl Jones. Thank you very much. Who had to step out for a little bit, and hopefully he'll be back in soon. The other members that are here, other than staff, are members of the evaluation team that are here for a part of this strategy conversation, and that is Liza McFadden, and also we have Terrence Watts. Okay, I would like for us to move forward in approving the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move that. I'll second.
Awesome. All right. So do we have any dissent here? Okay, sounds good. So we will definitely move forward with the agenda. All right, the next thing that we have to do is to select a lead negotiator. All of the negotiation team members will be participating in the negotiations as we look at the responses of the vendors. The lead negotiator is responsible for facilitating the negotiation session. So there's no additional power, but you are responsible for leading those negotiations. So I would like to open up the conversation. Is there any discussion as to who would like to be a lead lead negotiator for these conversations?
Dr. Glenn, if there's no extreme discussion, I would like to move that you be the leader of our negotiation team.
Well, I'm happy to accept that. Is there anybody else that is interested in serving?
I'll second the motion.
You second the motion. Okay. All right. So I am happy to serve in that capacity. Is there anybody that has any dissent in having me serve as the lead negotiator? Okay. Looks like I'm stuck with this. All right. Sounds good. Fair enough. Thank you so much. All right. I will serve as the lead negotiator moving forward. Okay. I know that we have the negotiations team here. I know most of you have had an opportunity to review the ITN in the past, but just to make sure all of you are current with what the scope of work is, Ted, I'm going to ask you to do a brief overview of the ITN, if you don't mind, just to make sure they're comfortable with what we asked the respondents to do.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you.
Sure.
So the ITN really had four sections that will be that the negotiation team will use as the basis for its negotiation. They were the four areas that were also scored by the evaluation team. The first is experience, qualifications, and references, which basically provides for organizational and personnel professional staff within the organizations. That was the first. The second in the and you'll.
Mr. Graham.
Yeah, just to be clear, because those were for the evaluation team. So what's presented here in the ITN is the selection criteria that this team will use. So
Well-
there is a difference between what the evaluators did in their scoring exercise and what this team does. This is also in the ITN, just to be clear that these are the criteria that are on the screen here, that this team uses for its award recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Now, as they look at that, though, when we get to the statement of work, those are the factors that they will use in judging whether or not the vendor can do the statement of work.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So with regard to the statement of work is really the nuts and bolts of the ITN. It includes or required the respondents to address the timeline, the years of annual and cumulative data that went into that they would use in light of COVID, et cetera. The key outcomes really are those that will be the primary focus. In addition to those, the key outcomes and measures for each priority area for both the short, mid, and long-term success, comprehensive programs inventory for each priority area, a gap analysis for each priority area, an informative programs inventory, basically examples of programs around the state, around the country that might address the issues that are looked at, that the council is interested in, and funding options. Number one, for expedited funding awards, and number two, for regular funding awards when the council is in a position to fund them. That's it, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that review. And I just want to read what's on the screen one more time to make sure that, you all as the negotiation team members, as you look through these proposals, and you will have an opportunity to review them, we definitely want to make sure they are able to demonstrate prior relevant experience. We also want to make sure that they are able to show their ability to approach and meeting the ITN goals. We definitely want to make sure that they are able to provide a really strong approach to the proposed services that we're asking them for. And then, of course, pricing will definitely be a consideration as a part of the negotiation process. I just wanted to reiterate that one more time for all of you. Now, I know most of you were present. I think all of you were present as we were convening with the evaluation team members. And there were a lot of things that were extremely important to us as we reviewed those proposals. And I just want to reemphasize those again and give you all an opportunity to hear about the things that were important. And I'm hoping that you all kind of write these things down. And as you go through those proposals again, be thinking about the significance of these things and the ability of these organizations to provide this information, and how do we get more of what it is that we want from from what they have in those proposals, more of what these things are that we want. The first one is where we really want national experience. We want to know that they've had the ability to do this before. They've been successful with this. They've been successful at a national level. And we want to know about their experience with other CSCs. So that was something that was very, very important to us. We wanted to make sure that they have, and this is my language, authentic community engagement. I think it's easy for someone to easily say, we are able to engage the community, but I'm looking for, really, how do they show that they are talking to the individuals that are part of this community? They're not just looking at, any type of data, that's anywhere, but they really have a way to engage that community in a meaningful and a powerful way. So be thinking about community engagement. I love the term authentic community engagement. Analytics, the ability to analyze data and understand what that data means. And also what type of data, how are they looking at that data? Where does that data come from? And what does that data truly mean? And also be able to determine, are there any biases, from that data? When you look at my driver's license, there's a lot of data, but my driver's license says that I'm 1 inch taller than I am and that I'm 20 pounds lighter than I actually am. But that's data, and someone can easily analyze that data, but that doesn't mean it's the truth. So how do you get to truthful data and truly analyze that data? I hope that makes sense to you all, but that's one thing that I was really looking for as we looked at their analytic abilities, not just to crunch numbers, but meaningful information. And then another one, this is actually Liza's words, a thoughtful approach to be able to show a thoughtful return on our investment. So as you look at the approach, how are they demonstrating that they are able to truly provide for us a return on the investment? The one thing that I would hate is for us to spend up to $300,000 and still not know what to do. We could have a lot of charts, we could have a lot of information, but we still don't know what to do. We want this to be meaningful. So how do we ensure that we are getting something that is tangible and definitely usable? Another thing that I want to add that I neglected to discuss during the evaluations meeting is metrics. The ability to find metrics at a national level, something that we could use to track our outcomes. So the ability to find those metrics, clearly communicate those, and help us use those metrics to track performance is very important. So those are the things that our team kind of discussed during the last meeting that we had. I wanted to re-emphasize those for all of you to make sure that you all are aware of that and looking for that information from that lens as you read those. I do want to take some time and have a quick conversation with my other evaluation team members. I just kind of reviewed some of the things that we thought were important. Is there anything else that you would like to bring forward that you think really needs to be said or articulated to the negotiation team members as they review this? Was there anything that was really missing for you as you looked through these proposals, as you read through the proposals that you want to make sure that they address? And are there any risk factors that you want them to consider? Were there any risks that you think that they should be aware of just to make sure that we ensure success? Eliza, you look like you're primed and ready to speak, so I'm going to go to you.
I am.
Sure.
So this is one that actually isn't specific to this. It's just I know when I've been in a lot of these negotiations, is ensuring that the personnel that is in this document are the personnel that are going to work on it, and that you get to meet the lead person, and that you're very specific that that person is not going to change over time. Because a lot of times, whether you work with a PR company or what have you, the person they put on paper because they look great on paper is not who you get the entire time, and they do a little switch out. So I would, really, say during that negotiation that you want to know who that group is. Is it exactly who they put in their negotiation? And that there's some caveat in whatever contract we do that if they change them out, we have to have an approval process in place. It's just something I've seen a lot in these things that can really, you think you're getting the very best person and you don't end up getting them. And people are what make this kind of thing tick. So that would be my biggest recommendation.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to come to Terrence in a minute, but Tad, you
Yes,
have
Madam Chair, just for the record, Dr. Benny Bolden, who is on the negotiation team, has just tried the evaluation team.
Dr. Bolden, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your ability to join us and to be here today. So thanks again. All right. Terrence, I would love to come to you. So Dr. Bolden, I'm giving you a heads up. I know you've had the pleasure of reading through all 8 of these too. So what I want to come back to you after we hear from Terrence is, what else do you want to ensure? What was important to you that you want to make sure the negotiations team is aware of? So Terrence.
Sure. So pricing, what you guys will be evaluating.
That's right.
I did find that even the top, looking at their itemized list of what cost them or what they propose would cost them, I think it will be valuable to really address some of the things that those top 3 have listed. And also, if it's appropriate, if they find themselves in a deficit, how they plan to, again, meet the requirement. So some of them were really low and still promised to produce, great quality. So I thought that was interesting. And some of them were right at the base. So I just think it's worth putting attention there.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay, so that's another thing. Cost is something that we would like for you all to take into consideration. Dr. Boland, I know you just sat down, but briefly, if you don't mind, just sharing some of the major things that you would like to make sure that they're thinking about as they're reviewing these.
First and foremost, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask you to excuse me for my late arrival. My boss sent me an email today. I had to attend a meeting. And I
Understand.
started telling them I have my civic duty, and then I realized who paid me. So I went to the meeting. But first and foremost, one of the things that jumped out to me was experience. How long have they done this? If they've done this, what were some of the outcomes of that past experience? That's one of the things I looked at. And then also we wanted to do a comparative analysis somewhat down the same point of what are we paying for? And making sure that they can outline with complete specification on what we're going to get for that kind of dollars, whether it was $250 or $300. And so both of those are super important to me as I was doing the reading through just what they're bringing to the table, what we will get out of that, and making sure somewhat down the lines is what I was thinking earlier in my notes is, are we going to get charts? Are we going to get real innovative data that is going to effectively help us change this community with the funds that we are going to be allocating? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so very much. yes, Mr. Springer.
If I can before we move off of that, so Terrence, to your point, the ITN required proposed budgets from the firms. So that was in, I forget what section, but we've got 3 responses now that we're shortlisted to. So I'd encourage you to look closely at those budgets. One of them didn't really provide much information.
Yes.
One of them provided, if you do the math, it's 1,291 hours to accomplish this. And the other one provided 3,300 hours. So of these 3 firms, when it comes to price, you've got a wide range of information, and I would really encourage you to drill down on that. Now, the university graduate students are cheap, so you can have a lot of hours because you're not paying them, or you're paying them a low rate, right? So maybe when they build their budget, that's what goes into it. But when it comes to the price was not a big part of the evaluation because we were pretty transparent that, we get $300,000, we'll spend $300,000 and we want as much as we can get in response to that. But if you look at their budgets, I would encourage you to press them because that's evidence of how much thought they've put into how they're going to approach the project. And is it reasonable or not? Like if someone's bid 1/3 of the hours that the other one has, you need to understand, well, who's more in the right ballpark, right? Is this a 3,000-hour project or is this a 1,000-hour project? So I would definitely push into that. To the point everybody's made about what do you get for this, at a high level, the deliverables are in the statement of work, right? We get draft reports and then we get final reports. We get, needs assessment and then the gap fillers. So you get 2 drafts and 2 finals. Probably at the contract level, that's how you want to do it. During the project, Walter, you're probably familiar with the deliverable expectation documents or the DEDs. And a lot of times that's a project management exercise. So who is going to set those expectations in a way that the contractor understands what they are and can meet them, and when will they be set? So one of the deliverables, and there was a question about it in the Q&A, is what do you mean about the project governance documents? In the proposed payment table and the schedule, we say that very first deliverable 2 weeks into the project is the project governance documents. That's where you need to be ready to agree with the contractor on important things like when are those deliverable expectations going to be fleshed out in greater detail. If your draft report is due in January, they better know soon exactly what you expect. So it's not just all charts or pretty pictures or stuff you've seen before. So that happens at the project level, unless you want to put it, because it's not in the contract now. In the contract now, it's just very high level, draft report, final report, draft report, final report.
Yeah.
And there's no real detailed expectations. And you probably won't get that hammered out in a week, but you got to be ready to get that hammered out in the first couple weeks of the project once the contract's signed. And that's what the project governance deliverable is. So you might want to spend some time having them talk about, because it was pretty obscure, as we expressed it in the ITN, somebody asked a question, you can look at how we answered the question. And, disciplined project people understand what that means, but you definitely want someone who demonstrates to you they understand how to manage a project well, and that they will give you really good project governance documents that'll guide both sides through the project. And then think about, on the council side, who's going to review those, who's going to approve those, because once you approve those, that's sort of the rule book for how this project's going to go.
Thank you. Yes, please, Neil.
I'm curious, we have the billable hours rate, the time times rate. How do we deal with the inevitable change request? That is to say, somewhere along the line, we'd like to know more about this thing or something like that. What's a way of dealing with that in this contract so that we don't?
Yeah, so we've got a rate because we asked them to give us the budget, right? The draft contract that is available now, the recommendation is it's a fixed price contract. So if this takes them 1,500 hours instead of 1,200 hours, you're not paying for 300 extra hours. You're paying a fixed price, and they need to meet the deliverable expectations. So the risk of taking more work, that's why it's important. And Dr. Glenn, you might want to address, you've heard 8 good firms talk about how they're going to meet the statement of work.
Yes.
You evaluation team members have read that. So you're the smartest people in the room right now, right? So you have a good understanding of how 8 people who do this for a living said they would do this one. If you're comfortable that we don't need to change that, because the needs assessment committee put a lot of work into that. That statement of work is pretty well fleshed out, and we're going to bank on that. We're going to sign a contract based on that. And to your point, Neil, that's what they're going to deliver. There's not going to be any changes because they need to meet that statement of work. And if there's questions about, because you saw how 7 other people said they would do it, right? If public consulting group missed something, or you might want to push them on, you said you do it this way. What about that way? That's how you can iron that out now, because the form of the contract, which again, the goal is to have this done in a week, right? This time next week, we have a final contract. So you've got a front part of the contract, which is the legal boilerplate. And then the attachment to that is the statement of work. So whether we make the final attachment their service description, which is their response to the statement of work, and that becomes attachment 1 to the contract, is something we need to flesh out. How are we going to commit them individually and specifically to what they're going to deliver? And once they do, it shouldn't change unless, Dr. Glenn, you think the statement of work might change. This is a pretty short project.
Right.
So we don't have a whole lot of time for changes if you're going to get the final report by next spring.
Yeah, and that was my next comment, because I'm comfortable with the statement of work as it's drafted. I think that we were very clear as to what the expectations were that we wanted. And as I read those proposals, there was nothing that I thought was missing that we did not ask them to comment on. So that was one thing that I wanted to make sure I checked in with the evaluation team. Are y'all comfortable with the statement of work as is, or were there holes in that you want to make sure the negotiations team backfills and make sure that there is content that they fill to make sure that we have a complete scope of work that we want done? Terrence, I'm gonna start with you. I'll go around.
And could I ask a specific question that maybe they can reply to
Yeah,
in this
absolutely.
response? the timeline that's provided on page 2
Mhm.
that for the top 3 speaks to 7 months, 10 months, and 10 months.
Yes.
That's 210 days, 300 days, and 300 days. In the proposed statement of work, under the payment schedule, the closeout is at 150 days. So my question is, from looking at their proposals, is there a way to connect the dots between a timeline that is significantly more aggressive than what appears to be their proposed timeline? And is there an ability to comment on that from the evaluation team as to where you saw potential for streamlining their process to meet our requirements, or are our expectations unrealistic according to the market? Because it appears to be that we're unrealistic.
Yeah.
But I'd love some impact or some feedback on that from the
So
evaluation.
can you?
Before they respond, I am going to ask you to comment on the timing, because that was my primary concern too. I was like, we even had one proposal that said, we're going to do this in 14 weeks or so. It was some really low number. Mr. Springer, will you please comment before I get the responses? Because given our fiscal budget, regardless of when the scope of work is completed or done, does that have any impact on our ability to provide timely funding for any of our proposals?
Right, so the goal, and this is in, it was at the back of the ITN on page 23, is the payment schedule, and that's where we have a contract. And that was 150 days. So Walter, do you say we're unrealistic? You think we're unrealistically generous with the time, or we don't give it enough time?
Now, my question is, if we say that this project is due in 150 days and the market responds that it's going to take 300 to 270 days, did we establish an ITN requirement that was unrealistic to what the market could bear? Or from the evaluation reviews, did you see something in their proposals that was just way too much time to do this, or there was way too much effort? We don't need that much effort. You shouldn't take 300 days to do it, or X.
Right.
If we need X, stop delivering us Y. In other words, we're the buyer, you're the seller. We don't have to buy what you're selling. If we want to buy a 150-day project, that's what we want to buy. If they're telling us there's no 150-day project to deliver, I need to know that.
Right, and that's
It's
key.
an expectation question.
Yeah, so the demand question, the buyer answer to that, where the 150 days come from, was the budgeting cycle and the revenue collection cycle that the council's on. So when you get into next year, into the second quarter, that's when the tax collector will, be collecting the revenue, making available. That's when the council needs to decide what's the best use for this money, right? So the 150-day schedule that was in the draft was driven by, that's when the council needs to be in a position to make fact-based decisions. So we need this work done by then, right? So that's a great question. If, our eyes are bigger than our stomach, as a member would say, right? We're asking for too much and too short a time. We definitely need to right-size that. And the goal is the council wants to make fact-based, credible decisions that, the stakeholders and the communities accept and get behind at that point in time, because that's when the council's making its funding decisions. So you want to right-size this so you get as much information as you can. Don't pay more or take longer to get information you don't need, but that's the goal.
And timing wise, 150 days, 5 months would be the end of March, would be the closeout, right? That would be the time when we would get the final deliverable, the council would get the final deliverable. If you are going to run summer programming, you need it in April, May, you need it in April to do summer programming, because you still have to put out proposals or RFPs. You have to get proposals from the community. You have to make awards. If you're going to do summer programming, I think a March 31st is that's like the latest you would want something.
Right. So that, and that's why.
That's why
the-
I think it's not an overreach in the ask, but my question, and I hate to go back to it again, when you ask the market what they can do and they tell you it's going to take twice as long as you're estimating, is that real or is that selling? And that's what I need to know from the evaluators is, did you feel like they really said, we can't do this in 150? Your expectations are too great.
I'll take it if you want. So there were a number of them so there was a Q&A option beforehand that they could ask questions. There was one group that asked that question in two different ways. Because they wanted it extended. But there was one group that actually said, we can do it shorter than what you think.
Yeah.
And then all of the others said that they could do it on the timeline. Now, you guys might negotiate. There was one, and I think it's one of these ones in the top three, but I can't remember, that because there's a request for us to do the expedited piece in here.
Yeah.
They had that on time, and then they had a little bit longer for the other part, but it wasn't, I think it was something you can negotiate.
Yeah.
It wasn't significantly longer.
On this chart that says 210, 300, 300, or 7, 10, and 10, none of that matches 5. So you're saying they all said they could do it, but I'm seeing here that their timelines are significantly different than they can do it.
I remember all of the timelines being longer than what we anticipated.
For sure, this one, I know public consulting was.
Yeah. Ted, please.
You all have in your handout.
Ted. That microphone doesn't work. That microphone doesn't work.
Try the one over
I'll
there.
say
Try that
it,
one.
I think
yeah.
everybody
You will need
is
to come up
referring-
here to speak so it's on the record. Those microphones are turned off.
Okay,
Sorry.
the light's on, it's not working. Oh, it's not.
That is correct.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you do have the handout. I think it's a chart that you were looking at, Mr. Sox. Shows that only 2 of the 8 respondents said that they could do the work within the 5-month period. One of them was one of the lowest scored ones, and one of them was the 4th scored. All the others came in at over 5 months, with 3 of them being 9, 10, and 10 months. Also, it was our thoughts as we were putting this together, given the time frame and the need for getting the expedited funding on the road, that the expedited funding request, which doesn't necessarily need to be based on the inventory or the gap analysis, would be in the first deliverable.
Yeah, and I think it creates an incredibly important strategic discussion, because if only one of the top 3 can deliver on 5 months, we don't have a debate. You know, so if we are tied to a 5-month deliverable and we can't extend that time frame, and only one of the 3 can meet it, then negotiating with all 3 makes no sense.
I don't think any of the 3 said that they could meet it.
That's what I'm thinking of, a strategic way of getting to Monday.
Okay.
If we were to acknowledge the top 3 had achieved the next step,
Mhm.
and they had to then respond to us about their capacity to do this work, the proposal work that they proposed in a 5-month timeframe, and 2 of them said that they can't entertain that.
Mhm.
It narrows the scope. If all 3 can do it, at least we're starting from a point of saying that the timeline is off the table.
Yeah.
I'd rather start with knowing that they can all do it in the 5 months than going down the road with all 3 and having a debate and a question and answer over how long can they take to do it.
Okay, I
Is that-
understand what you're saying. And now tell me if I'm off base with this, because as I was reading this and I realized that their timelines were longer, I immediately thought they need more time to get done what we need to get done. And I didn't feel as if any of them were dragging their feet in completing any of the work that was being done. So I felt as if their time frame was reasonable, and that our request was too aggressive. Was my, the way I read this. I was like, we're just being too aggressive. They're telling me if this is the product that you want, then definitely you can do this. And that's why I was asking the question about timing. I kept on asking the question about timing. If we do stick with the 10 months that they are proposing here, do we still have ample time within the fiscal year to do what we need to do and still get recommendations for expedited funding? And my answer to that was yes, that we can do that. So for me, the 5 months doesn't matter at this point. I don't know if anybody disagrees, but that was my understanding of it.
I was trying to get to the point of, didn't they all say they could meet the expedited piece? That's
The
what I was
expedited
trying
piece,
to say.
yes. I don't think any of them said they could not meet the timeline for the
'Cause isn't
expedited
that
piece.
sort of your point, to have programs that start early?
Clarify for me what the expedited piece is. I'm confused.
Okay, so there was in the ITN a request to put together an expedited slate to get dollars out
Yes.
quickly. And then there was supposed to be a phase 2 where they made their second recommendation.
So as I kind of called it summer programming, the expedited piece would be the summer programming perspective.
And that's a deliverable that's within
The scope.
that
Timeframe.
7 to 10 month period.
Right.
And that's why I think she was saying we could expand it because they all said they could meet the
Meet the
expedited.
expedited.
Right, and I guess my second part of this is that when you set up a contract and you're paying for deliverables, you often hold and reserve payment until you get your final deliverable. We would be way down the road on this project and getting our first deliverable at 150 days, the expedited deliverable, and probably not willing to make full payment at that point
I would
because we
agree.
still have a significant deliverable to come. So in a fixed price contractual arrangement, is it also fair that we would be paying on deliverables, not on time passing? In
Yeah,
other words, it's not going to be broken up into 5 equal payments over
right.
5
So
months.
in the ITN has the payment schedule, and the way it works is it's almost 30% retainage. I thought it was particularly aggressive on our part. There's a little bit, in case it was a small firm, the project governance documents, they get a 10% payment to startup cost. But then the contract payments are spread out over time with the 30%.
So the expedited schedule is not here.
Correct.
It's not on
That's
this
part
table.
of it's in this statement of work, section 5.
Right, but all of these days would get moved on an expedited.
That
and
would
then
be in
following
the
bill.
draft report of the funding options, which on this schedule would be day 120. It's the
120
first
would
time you
become,
see that.
120 would become 150, and then days after that would be extended.
Possibly,
You're
yeah.
right.
So I would just answer Walter's question with the resounding, yes, it's super important, and we don't want to set ourselves up for failure. If across the board, industry says this is going to take longer than you thought it was going to take, you, the negotiation team, need to deal with that. And, one thing to do would be ask them, assuming it was 150 days, what can you give us? We're not going to extend the time. What can we get in 150 days? Or, okay, we'll make it a 200-day contract. What are we going to require in the first 100 days? What are we going to require in the next 50 days? What are we going to require in the last 50 days? That's the kind of stuff you can hash out in negotiations. But it is significant if, because I didn't see the timeline. I didn't read the service description because I'm not the programmatic guy. But if they're coming back consistently over the 150 days that was in the ITN, that's material.
Thank you for the
Hold
clarification.
on. I think Neil was first and then we'll come to Terrence.
I really want to follow up that. I'm not sure totally what I heard, but first of all, everybody all 3 said they could meet the expedited deliverable within the 5 months that we originally put forward. There is another component that could take another 5 months according by the timeline of 2. And so I guess this is a strategic question really for the council and 4 are here. So how much does that extra time matter to you? And is 8 months as far as you're willing to go? Does that become part of our strategy? And if that's our strategy, is there a way to objectively determine what things might fall off of the deliverable to meet a final 8 months now one is 7 months, but a final 8 months if it's GW and they say they can do it in 10.
Okay, so I do want, Fred, I'm going to ask you to comment on this because this was my understanding. The biggest issue that we had right now was meeting the short time deliverable. All of the other timelines, it was my understanding that if they take up to a year even, we still have enough time for them to complete this body of work so that we are able to fund grants for the next year. So as long as they meet our deadline for the expedited time, I was comfortable with their proposed times for the extended completion of the delivery of the work. Even though we said 5 months, they said, we can't do it in 5 months. We can do it in this, and it still did not hurt our ability to fund projects moving forward. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, because that was my understanding, and that's how I was comfortable with this.
Right. So the way this is drafted, that draft funding options report, the first deliverable that deals with funding options, which would include the expedited, like the next summer funding options, plus the ones in the first quarter of the fiscal year, that's not due until day 120. So that would be December, January, February, March 1st would be the first time you would see the draft report of the funding options. So by March 1st, they would have broken out here. This might be an expedited one you do in the summer, and this might be one you do after October.
Okay.
But I think what's important is at what points is the council making decisions, and what kinds of decisions and what kind of information does it need at each decision point? Start there and then tailor this deliverable schedule to that, because you don't want the council to be in a position where they have to make a decision and the information they need isn't due for another month, right? So you want to align those. What you get out of this exercise feeds directly into what the council's doing. So you want to make sure you align those.
Sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
let me say this too. I don't think the council anticipated a study that would take a year. You know, we talked about what, 6 to 8 months at most, because, you know, the funding will start. We don't want to be sitting on this waiting for a needs assessment to help guide us. But my specific question was what we were given on page 9. Does that relate to anything? The payment schedule on here? The closeout date says 150 days, final 120 days. That's 4 months. So I mean, what does that relate to anything? And then I know one of the, based on what you all gave us today, one of the proposals indicated that they could, if I'm understanding it correctly, one of the companies that responded to the request indicated, I thought it said,
Look at page 2.
yeah, 5 months. One says 6, one says 7. I don't know what this 3.5 months is. I'm not sure. But I guess my question is, in advancing 3, was deliverables and the time period for deliverables also, you know, a consideration as well? Because I really don't believe the council wants to enter a contract that's going to be a 12-month contract, especially if we've got other entities that says that they can do the work and we believe they can do the quality work within a much shorter time period, so that we can get these funds, you know, into the hands of service providers based on the needs assessment, based on us knowing where the needs are. I just don't believe we want to wait a year for that report.
So for the 3 that went forward, Commissioner, on page 2, The three that moves forward, the first one indicated that they could do it within 7 months, and then the last two indicated that they could do it within 10 months. Those are the only three that were brought forward. So all of the other ones that were shorter, and I guess the decision that we need to make is 10 months too long? Is 7 months too long for what it is that we want to do? But I just wanted to let you know that none of the ones that said 5 months were brought forward.
Right, I recognize.
Okay.
I sat in while
Okay.
you guys were talking,
Okay.
but that takes me back to my question. Did we factor in, and I heard some of the members say, well, I was impressed with this one. I believe they could do the work. I was impressed with that one. So it was a lot of impression from the companies that submitted their proposals. So my question is, did we factor in the fact of when they could provide the services, when they indicated to us they could provide the services as part of recommendations on what groups to go forward, to put before the negotiation team or to put before the full council?
We did not, to answer that question, we did not have extensive conversations today at all about the timing. And I think given that fact, then we need to have that conversation with these three that are moving forward. I just wanted to answer that question specifically.
And-
Okay, I know several people are raising their hands. I'm sorry. Oh, I think Ted, then Terrence, then Fred.
In terms of the overall funding, just from our perspective as staff, when we first started writing the ITN, the hope was that it would be done, the needs assessment would be done in time to use it to begin contracting next October in 2022. And have everything in place to be able to do that grant making process in the way the council would like to do it over the long term. Having the grant process itself in place, the software in place to track the outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. Given what we have seen with regard to, and I mentioned earlier, the county is on the same grant making process. They grant in October. So they'll grant again in October of 22. They're beginning their grant making process in January, in 3 or 4 months, because the time frame for doing that work takes that long. So we've come to the conclusion that this needs assessment, while it will inform the expedited funding in the short term for the summer, and even longer term funding when it's done with some process that the new executive director and y'all will have to figure out, can get the money out. But in terms of using the needs assessment process together with the enterprise software, together with the grant making process that needs to be in place, et cetera, to measure the outcomes and to get it all done for the way that you will be doing it in the future, the first opportunity to make those grants based on all of that will be 2023. And so the timeline that we had originally hoped to get all of that stuff together and the grant making process up and running in October in 2022 next year is not going to be in place, regardless of the length of time the needs assessment takes. So as we've looked at this, and I think perhaps from some of the perspectives of the needs assessment committee, given that having the time frame run a little bit longer won't impact the 2023 utilization of the needs assessment for the fundamental work, the grant making that the council will be doing.
Said what I was trying to say, Ted. So thank you very much for
Can
that.
I
A little
ask this
follow-up.
question?
Sorry, can I have a continuation?
Please.
Okay. On
Ted.
page 9, which some of you were looking at, did you have a question? It's a
Yes,
follow-up for
I just
him.
want to follow up with Ted. Does that include the expedited,
I was about to go to.
any expedited grants? Because I mean, I'm on the council and I have been very vocal. I don't think we need to sit here on these funds that taxpayers have
We won't.
voted for until 2023.
No, ma'am.
So, I mean,
Actually,
will this
if you look at
involve-
page 9
I think that's
in the
where I
handout.
was. I think
Yeah,
that's where-
one of the things, I guess in short, I would say, as we go through as y'all go through the negotiating process, you will be determining what those deliverables are going to be and when the payments will be made.
Okay.
It was our thinking when we put this together, I think it was the council's thinking when y'all adopted it, or approved it, is that expedited funding would be one of the first deliverables. It would be
Okay.
coming in March or so.
Not 2023 though, right?
Of 2022, March
okay.
March of this coming year, and
Right.
that could be used to put money on the streets
Okay,
for the next year or so until the other stuff is on the. And Walter, in terms of your question about the expedited funding, it's really kind of, as we considered it, kind of low hanging fruit. Programs, initiatives, maybe, it's a public awareness campaign. Maybe it's funding childcare slots, et cetera. But it's low hanging fruit that the council can begin investing in and knowing that there could be an impact and beginning to measure that impact. And we don't know the extent to which that low hanging fruit is available, but that would be the job of the vendor to find out during those first 45 days or 90 days.
All right, we'll go to Terrence and then we'll go to Dr. Bowler.
I'm so sorry. I have a continuation.
Oh, I'm
Sorry. This
Yes,
was
go ahead.
staff
I
time.
apologize.
That was exactly the point. So I just want to, on point 9, one of the things through this process and talking to our community partners that might be causing confusion that we did not amend in the ITN, but as a staff recommendation, is you'll see that there were kind of 5 deliverables. One of them was just funding options. And in the grid right now, that draft of that's not due until 120 days, with the final being 135 days. Our recommendation is to make that 2 separate deliverables as it's written in the ITN. So currently under funding options, there's an A and a B, A being the expedited funding, B being that longer term funding, separating that out as 2 separate deliverables and changing the order so that that's very, very clearly stated. That's not what's currently there, but that is one of our staff recommendations based on all the factors that Mr. Granger just shared. The second piece that I just want to point out in terms of thinking about timelines, just to share, sorry, I remember that you had a hard time with my mask on understanding me. The other piece just from our community conversations and sharing has to do with the outcome, the deliverable for key outcomes and measures. Right now in our community, several of our partners who are grant-making agencies are also engaged in activities where they're looking at how they measure priorities, what specifically they're looking at. We know that CHSP, the city and county grant-making process, is looking at that. We know that the United Way is constantly evaluating their priorities and how they measure them. We know that the Community Foundation of North Florida is looking at those. So in our timing of things, as we start to move things around, I just want to ensure or implore upon the committee or the team that in your negotiations that still stays front and center and kind of first as it is right now, so that it aligns and informs with our community partners. So I know you guys are more focused on some of the other stuff, but I didn't want that to get lost in the mix and understanding what that deliverable was. And that will help us, I want to say market, for lack of a better word, those community conversations and in thinking about what those expedited funding options might be.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that the recommendation of splitting funding options into 2 separate and not losing sight of that. The first, I'm going to call it real deliverable of key outcomes and measures.
Sure.
Thank you.
yeah. Can I have a follow-up question with Holly? So those entities that you raised, those nonprofits and what have, you want to make sure from the negotiation team standpoint that we make sure that those are out front with the entities that we are negotiating with, so that can be part of what they submit or part of their analysis. Is that what you're saying?
I'm going to restate your question the way I believe I heard it. During the negotiation process, do we want to ensure that whoever our selected vendor is connected to those entities for information purposes and collaboration? Yes, and we have laid that groundwork and informed each of those partners where we're at in our vendor selection process, and that we hope once we secure a vendor that they would be open to working with them. And so far, all of the partners that we have talked to have agreed to being a partner in this process.
Okay, and is it just, what, the three that you just mentioned, or is that?
We have CHSP, so City and County, the United Way, and Community Foundation. We're also having conversations with 211. They don't measure things the same way.
Okay,
We're having conversations with the COC, and part of these conversations are related to the needs assessment, but it's also to inform the data system user group that we mentioned at one of the council meetings previously. So kind of, because these will eventually go hand in hand. And then I know I'm forgetting some, Ted. The Leon County Sheriff's Office, as well as potentially the local community-based care. I'm going to get it wrong, Northwest Florida Network, Health Network. So these are all that we're having conversations with. The first four that I mentioned, United Way, 211, CHSP, and Community Foundation, have agreed to be open and transparent.
So thank you for that, Holly. I just want to restate this just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So for the three proposals that are being moved forward, each one of them has agreed that they can meet the deliverable at 120 days to give us an informed decision on the expedited funding.
okay,
So that is
Right.
set across the board.
okay.
What is still up for negotiation is when this will be completed. And even at the completion, we still won't have funding available until 2023. So
For grants, for
for
grants.
grants, right, for grants moving forward.
But we
So
will have the expedited.
we will have
Okay.
those across the board for all the three that are still on the table.
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure I emphasize that. Okay,
Thank you.
Terrence, and then, right,
Thank you. So I just wanted to go back to a few things.
sure.
And one of them, Dr. Zandra, was what you asked about, which was when the negotiations start, some things that we wanted to make sure were provided attention to.
Yes.
And so even though Public Consulting Group was my top pick, I would say for them, the authentic community engagement would be an area of focus of how they possibly plan to meet that based on how their operations is set up. So I thought that would be something very important to articulate with them. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, which was Commissioner Cummings, the timeframes. So in the evaluation process, I think they'll only get the actual three that have moved on. They won't get the other proposals from the other ones. So those, for me, those ones that had those short timeframes, based on their overall proposal, there was like no way the quality would be there, or I mean, it was just impossible. And so, and then the funding that they proposed, it just didn't add up, didn't line up, and that's likely what contributed to such a low score for me. The other thing was, so for Mr. Springer, I was wondering, does the deliverables, before they go into negotiations, does the council have to already have established these new deliverable dates? Is that putting the negotiations team at a disadvantage, or is that something that should already be established before they go into negotiations? These proposed deliverables that we're thinking that we need to be able to present to them, can they meet by a certain time? Does that have to be reevaluated?
Yeah.
And then my last thing was, so for me, the 7-month one, I think, was the public
It was.
consulting
It
group.
was.
Okay, here was my evaluation of that. Their structure, their organization, I felt if anybody had the strongest proposal that could articulate and actually meet that time frame and produce a quality product with the funding dates, I thought they were the strongest. Even the other two that I rated high, such as Q&Q, even their, breakdown of the deliverables and what they were funding. I mean, some of it was a little, for me, but I mean, Public Consulting Group, that's what kicked them also to the next level, was that time frame, what they articulated they could do, how I felt like it was supported they could do it. It was very clean and clear cut.
Thank you very much for that. Very well said. Thank you very much.
And
Fred.
that's a good segue, because I wanted to, Terrence just answered the commissioner's question. did the evaluation process take into account
Consider-
how much
right.
time they proposed? So the answer is yes, because that was a big part of the 65 points on those two factors. So to your point, and page 9 of today's handout, that table is the same table that was in the ITN statement of work. So the deliverables and the timeline, the schedule. So that is negotiable. The council approved the ITN process, which includes the ability to change requirements. So in my mind, the negotiation team is empowered to, you understand what we're trying to accomplish, negotiate, which can include changing, adding to the requirements, taking away from the requirements without council approval. Your recommendation of award is going to be a form of contract, which can vary from the statement of work that was the draft with the ITN. And then that'll have to be explained to the council. Look, during the negotiation process, this changed, that changed, and they have the ultimate approval authority.
Right.
But they do not have the opportunity to approve it before, Monday. So I would say, and Holly, going back to you, if we have recommended this table of deliverables and schedule, the team needs that now, because and when are we going to propose that to the vendor? Ideally, as much as we can give them and not spring on a Monday, give them a chance to digest it and be ready to respond to it is, ideal.
Sure.
Given the time frame, some things might be coming up Monday because we'll be working on them over the weekend. But that's the goal. And again, tie it to your understanding of what decision points the council's going to have and how to get as much information as possible at the right times for the council.
Now, I do know that the staff has agreed, and please tell me if I'm misspeaking, to give us a new list of those new deliverables by tomorrow, correct? Okay, all right. So the negotiations team will get the updated or proposed changes for the deliverables. So you have those in hand. And then do we share those with the 3 organizations that we will be negotiating with or not?
I would, because I would want to know when you meet with them, do you agree to these?
Okay.
Is this right? To Walter's point, we think we know what we want, but we're going to the market to get our needs met. The market can't meet it, then we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Okay.
So, and we've got 3 good firms who do this for a living. If they're all saying the same thing, we should probably think that, it's right. So, and the other thing I would stress is you've got different firm sizes among the 3. One has 2,500 employees, one has 20.
Yeah.
So the key outcomes and deliverables, you're getting that. A challenge on this project is going to be when it falls in the calendar. You've got a 5-month project, 2 of which are holiday months, right? Not much gets done in government in, Thanksgiving and Christmas. So if these folks are going to be expected to go interact with a bunch of other government agencies, and, if we get key outcomes and deliverables, which is so important, and we get that on December 15th, then what happens? Because they've got to be moving and be able to say, these are the key outcomes and approvals. So from day 46 to 90, when they're doing the bulk of the work, you can't go back to them on day 80 and say, well, sorry, we changed our mind.
Yeah.
You're going to have to be very disciplined.
Fred, to that point, and why it's so important that you have good project management, like you mentioned earlier, if staff are able to align that new proposed timeline with council meeting dates for
Perfect.
decision-making, it makes a lot more sense. Example is if we have a meeting on the 2nd week of December and a deliverable comes in the 3rd week, you're wasting 2.5 weeks for a decision in January that could have been made in December if you'd have moved the deliverable up by 1 week.
Right.
So it needs to be relevant timelines to our decision-making body that we're going to be giving to, unless the council determines that the project manager can take the deliverable, authorize it, and move forward with payment without having to present and getting votes and things. So it is how you set up the project management and how you manage the deliverables becomes very important.
Yes.
Mayor?
And how that drives the schedule.
Sure. Mr. Jones?
Please accept my sincerest apologies.
No worries.
I was trying to juggle multiple things and going by the schedule. So please forgive me, but I want you to know I'm still by no means any less interested. And I'm not exactly sure where you are in your conversation, but I am concerned about the approach. And I don't know if anyone else noticed this as we talk about doing a needs assessment and having the type of local engagement that we require. I noticed that the respondents that we're considering do not have local subcontracting unless I missed that. And if that's not the case, can we add that as a part of the approach, particularly when you're talking about creating focus groups with particularly the client base that we're serving, honest brokers and well-known entities, agencies with whom we already have relationship and trust will get you the best types of authentic responses and as well as the greatest level of participation compared to some dry cattle call from strangers that people may very well, particularly our service group, may very well may ignore. And then if we're talking about the current inventory of services and already existing agencies, there too is a lack of trust or seeing perhaps even the necessity in committing. Those of you who have been involved from the very beginning, you know that you came with your own legitimate cachet as people who were well known in the community to get the first level of responses that led to the creation of the ballot. And we did that 18 months of exhaustive work, but that was from local people. Here now we're talking about outsiders. And I just want to know is an approach that creates a type of collaboration with already existing agencies, partners, or individuals, whomever we would negotiate with, can that be a part of the approach? I said all that to ask.
I'm glad because it's here in my notes, and I completely agree with you, because once again, my term authentic community engagement, I really think that they need people who are from the community to be a part of those conversations. And one of the things that I wanted to ask and talk to them about is if they don't have people here on the ground in the community as a part of the work for the engagement, who can they subcontract with, or who will they pull in from the community to ensure that level of engagement? So I'm completely agree. I'm glad you brought it up because I had it here.
Thank
to
you.
bring that.
All right.
All right.
And I didn't know if we had already mentioned it, but
We haven't gotten to that
okay.
yet. No.
Thank you.
But I would say that that's important. And again, and I would prepare you if I'm role play,
Yeah.
the vendor now, which of the statement of work requirements is the authentic community engagement? Because when I'm looking at the, compare the comprehensive programs inventory, I'm not seeing where I need to go meet with a bunch of, community stakeholders and do that kind of authentic community engagement.
Okay.
I don't need to do that in order to meet your statement of work.
But I can change that statement of work to
You
include that.
can, yeah, but I
Okay.
would say if that's your expectation,
Yes.
you definitely pay attention
Put it in there.
to, this is the work product of the Needs Assessment Committee that the council's approved, and it was attached to the ITN that they responded to.
But Mr. Springer, in our statement of work, it does require that type of engagement with already existing agencies and individuals in the community. And we can't change the statement of work because that's what they responded to. So, but what can't contain therein is the type of subjective interaction that is required that necessitates what we're describing here. So it was not, they can't make these measurements or assessments without that type of engagement.
So, and I would say, well, it's on, section C2B, when we're talking about authentic community engagement, that's the section convey understanding at the county and neighborhood level. So in order to convince us you understand it at the neighborhood level, you need to go meet with people in the neighborhoods. You need to have authentic community engagement. You need people on the ground here in Leon County to do that. do you understand that? How are you going to do that? Do you need local resources?
Yeah.
Here's some firms, here's some groups that we think could help you do that. You got to be careful. You don't want to dictate who they use as subcontractors because then they'll blame you if it doesn't work out. But you should definitely make available to them the knowledge that we have about if you're in Boston or Miami and you want to get a neighborhood understanding, here's a list of people you might work with.
I do think that these proposals address that. They do say that we will engage at the community level, and they're pretty clear about that. But I personally wanted more details and who are you going to use? And am I allowed to ask those types of questions during the negotiations? Okay,
Yes.
I just wanted to be
Yeah.
clear on that.
So
Because,
to Liza's point too about, the key personnel,
right,
and that's not in the contract now, we could add that, the person I'm talking to, your project lead, you're going to commit that person for the life of the project. And the 2 or 3 other people, the key project personnel, you can also have them commit to subcontractors
okay,
of their choosing that you approve, and then they can't change them without your approval. So that's a possibility too.
okay.
I just wouldn't dictate to them who they use.
No, I don't think we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
dictate, yeah. Ms. McFadden, you had a.
I was just going to say, during the evaluation meeting, we spent a lot of time on the authentic community engagement because George Washington University, while they're national, is here in town right now working with Department of Health. They talk a lot about the community engagement they're doing. They talk a lot about how they get people to come to what they're engaged with. Public Consulting did the same thing very, very well. QQ, I did not think they were as clear on their outcomes for each priority area. And if I were going to dig into something with them, that's where my questions would be. I was a little concerned that they would have to take a lot more time to ramp up than the other
Yeah.
two.
I agree.
Hmm.
Completely agree with
So
you.
that's what we would do in the negotiations.
Correct.
I have a quick
Clarify, specify.
I have a quick question on page 2 of our handout. There's a column entitled Key Project Data Sources and Input Methodologies. This is sort of my sketchy look at a proposal because I haven't seen the proposal. So this is what I have today. 2 areas that were highlighted are around this community engagement piece, and I only see youth mentioned in one of the areas, PCGs. Could the evaluators clarify for me today whether or not George Washington and QQ included youth in their group modeling or their community forums? Was that brought forward as someone that they would talk to and only just not shown here? Or did PCG do an exceptional job saying they would talk to youth?
I remember families being articulated as a part of their community engagement. I don't remember specifically them calling out youth, but I did feel as if they were going to the community to get the information that they wanted.
All 3?
I do, yes, for all 3 of these.
And I'll look particularly for that
Sure.
when I'm pre-session. The other question is around, I think what Holly identified earlier as a significant early deliverable, and that's the 45-day deliverable on the outcomes and measures. Again, on this particular chart, all I really see is this one line about secondary data, state, local, and national, and everybody has it. It's not discriminated. It all looks equal. So from an evaluator perspective, this is my only chance to talk to y'all about this. Did any of y'all feel like that ability to come forward within 45 days of contracting with outcome and measurement data in our priority areas was significantly enhanced by one team? Or did they use a technique that was appealing that said this is how they would do that?
Terrence.
So once you guys, and Mr. Springer, they'll get the full proposals of the top 3. Okay.
Correct.
I think once you guys get those proposals, a lot of light will shed as far as how we kind of arrived at those top 3. And I can tell you for the public consulting group, for the example you mentioned, them specifying kids, that's the detail that they gave. So the other ones was broad and you could rise to conclusion that they're going to involve children, but they were very specific. So when you talk about the other question about the time frame, even though that public consulting group is not local, I did get a sense that reading their full proposal, they were equipped. If they said that they could meet a certain time frame, they were equipped to meet that. The QQ, which was my second one, the more diverse one, I felt that they could possibly meet it. And you will see, how they articulate where they're spending their resources in and time, how that kind of correlates, is there a possibility that the time is off? Or, is there some areas there where, they might not meet it based on how they itemize where they were spending their resources. So to answer your question, PCG, hands down, I felt like what they presented, they would be able to follow through on it. They had the structure and to do it. Even, and I just want to say this about Mr. Jones and Dr. Zandra about the community piece. So when you first read PCG, you're like, oh, it's just some big corporation. But then they narrowed it on down how, oh, okay, they may be able to have some experience about this community level, even though they're a large corporation. So I think even one of them may be from Tallahassee, I think. So, right. So there's some connection there. So, yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I agree with Terrence as well. There was a lot of information within the packet that I think will bring clarity to some of the questions. I also thought Q&Q did a good job with exposing the fact that they have been in Broward and Dade County in areas that look like this community. And that's why I voted them the way I did, because they have some knowledge of this particular community. Though I understand Broward and Miami-Dade is much larger, but it does mirror some of those areas. I'm from that community. I know the area in which they did the research in, and it does mirror this area. And so I think a lot of them, and they did talk specifically about different agencies that they would partner with. I highlighted a lot of those within the packet because that brought credence, not just them, but PCJ as well as George Washington. And he did outline that, specifically saying children's families, welfare, different state departments, and how that information can be vital to the success of what they're trying to provide for us.
And then Walter, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
sorry. I
didn't
was
see
just
you.
going to lean
Please.
in on, and I agree with everything Terrence and Benny have said. I was just going to lean in and say, George Washington University, the one thing that concerned me was, yes, I thought they could do it, but I had to transpose and assume because they were doing everything that they talked about, they used a lens of health
Yes.
around the entire thing.
They used to what?
A lens of health.
Okay,
Yeah, they
yes,
did.
yes.
And therefore, it made me wonder, okay, they're excellent when they talk about health and how they do it. Can I transpose that they're going to be as good in the education
Yeah.
sphere? Can I transpose that they're going to be as good in the child welfare area? So although I ranked them second, that was a big question for me that if I were on the team, I would really want to dig into and understand, are they going to be able to take that out of the health arena and bring it to all the other priority areas? And that section of the ITN where we asked them to break it down, the key outcomes for each priority area, when you read Boston Consulting, I think to Terrence's point, they do it beautifully. There's not a single proposal. That's why so many people rank them number one, that shows that level of detail. So, that's, when you look at those key outcomes for each priority area, which I think is what you're trying to get to around the question of youth and so forth, we might have had a kind of short period for this ITN.
Yeah.
And so if you weren't already well grounded in this area, I think it became very difficult. And we talked, there were like 4 that rose to the top and the rest were like Fs. You agree?
Yeah.
No,
They
really?
were bad.
I don't care how thick the packet was, it was still terrible.
They were, there was a wide range. I mean, they were
Right.
clearly, the cream
Really?
clearly rose to the
Right.
top.
Yes.
Yes, we were
Can I,
reviewed.
Madam Chair, can I ask a stupid question?
Of course.
Why aren't the evaluators part of the negotiation?
So, Mr. Springer, I'm going to ask that question to you because I think we're following the process where we have the evaluation negotiations. Will you explain the process for us?
Yeah, so oftentimes and you look to the state for, example, the evaluation team tends to be more programmatically oriented because you're looking at can they meet the requirements? You need the understanding of, the health and all the different things. So they tend to be more programmatic. The negotiation team tends to retain some of that, but then pick up negotiation strength and also contracting strength, which is why it's good to have an attorney and people who have a lot of negotiation experience. So sometimes those committees are the same. And there is overlap with Dr. Glenn's on both because of the, institutional knowledge that carries over.
Right.
But primarily it's who is available, and you tend to orient the evaluators more programmatically and the negotiators more, business and negotiation.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to know.
Yeah,
that
that's
they've
there is a good
evaluated.
question.
Valid point.
Yeah.
May I follow up with that? And I don't know if our process is sacrosanct or malleable, but I think for us to put the CSC in the best posture possible for such an important effort, perhaps if we'd be willing, and those who have already evaluated, perhaps we could operate as a committee of the whole rather than to segregate, because I think the perspective that those of you who've already evaluated, which I believe is where you're headed with that, would be invaluable for us to put ourselves in the best posture possible to negotiate, because you've done this exhaustive evaluation. And it's not to say that the rest of us, what you've done, and if I might liken it to this, Madam Chair, y'all have culled the herd. Now that we've culled the herd, now the rest of us can join you and finish the project. And for those who will be willing to continue, who've already been a part of the evaluation process, because I mean, your point of view is, I think, is extremely important.
Absolutely.
Is there a problem with that?
Well, the only challenge that would create is with sunshine laws, because it's very important to understand who is the statute uses negotiation team. So you're free to decide who's on the negotiation team, but you need to be super clear on who's on the negotiation team, because there are rules that attach, mainly sunshine rules, that attach to that body. What's a meeting like now where you're subject matter experts and we have the benefit of all the work that you've done, you can call on staff, you can have conversations with people. But at this stage, unless people were added to the negotiation team, they would just be viewed as subject matter experts that you can consult with, but they cannot have any recommendation authority. They can share what they've learned, but if they're going to be viewed as someone who influences the outcome, then they should be on the team. And I forget if the team was approved by the council.
It was.
That would be the problem. Logistically, can we?
And I also want to mention that we have the benefit of having read these proposals. You all haven't yet, but you will have an opportunity to review them before we go into negotiations. So some of the insights that we have now, you will also have as you review them, because you won't go into the negotiations blind. So I just wanted to emphasize that also.
And again, my point is, and I don't know if we don't want to turn over that. I seem to continue to put my foot in my mouth at these meetings, trying to redo the processes after they've started. But what I do want to, but the reason I'm open to this is because I want to optimize our engagement with whoever the awardee is. And I think that the perspective born of our already existing committee members who are on the evaluation team, I think that same perspective optimizes our position as a CSC going into the negotiation. And and although we received guidance at the very beginning, now that the process has started, I see it that I would like for us to consider if everyone else thinks it's worthwhile, to be willing to relook at our approach going forward and be able to make a recommendation to the CSC either by email vote or if we can't do it before we meet again, or some way that could possibly occur, because I just think to lose this perspective, for those of you who already participated, I just don't think that puts us in the best position. You'll remain with us, but I think they have a great perspective that I think the negotiation deserves.
I completely agree. Okay, hold on. Neil, I think you were next. And then I'll come to Liza.
Well, I'll just interject that, I mean, I would have no objection, particularly on a voluntary basis, if the evaluation team members came as subject matter experts in that role that Fred just described. What I was really going to say, and to me, I keep thinking about how are we going to determine value? What is the best value from these contracts? And I wanted to go back just one more time to the timeline question and try out an idea, which is, it seems to me, Commissioner Cummings sort of broached this, that we're trying, the expedited part is to get us a head start on the summer in particular. And I think a recognition that grant making in 2022, 23 is also to some extent going to not be informed by the results of the longer part of the study. But the council seemed to me, and I remember particularly Paul's words on this, about the long-term value and significance of this report. And in terms of value, we'd rather have a thorough report that would serve us for the remaining 8 years than rush too much on the first full fiscal year. I just want to try that out and see in terms of value, whether that means that 7 months or 10 months doesn't have a high value difference. 5 months does on expedited, but 7 to 10 might not. If I'm just looking for a reaction to that in terms of trying to weigh value.
Okay, does anybody have a reaction to this?
Yeah,
And I want to get to Liza. Go ahead.
Right, but it was my understanding that the 5-month expedited, I guess, summary or what have you, doesn't really impact the long run final analysis that the contractor will do. I think that 5 months will just give us some type scope so that we can start utilizing some of that fund. But it should not have any adverse impact on the quality of the final product that they will provide after 8 or 9 or 10 months. That's my understanding.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Neil, I think the 3-month difference between the 7 and the 10 gives the council a 3-month head start.
Right.
So I think it is advantageous, but it's the time frame between June 1 and September 1. So you don't have your new fiscal year money in yet. You're still doing summer programming with your expedited. So I don't know that delivering it 3 months earlier is a significant value add.
That's what I was
But
saying.
I think
Right.
post 10 months, you start taking away value.
Yeah.
So if through negotiations, we start adding tasks or we start demanding processes that create longer timeframes, then the respondents' response to that request becomes important if they say, oh, well, that's going to take 12 months.
Yeah.
Now the distance between 10 and 12 months becomes more important than the distance between 7 and 10. Because I think that the action the council is going to want to take next fall is pretty important compared to when we get this deliverable.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
agree. I agree with Walter and Commissioner. And I just wanted to say, good research is going to take that kind of time. In order to get some really good information, we got to exhaust that time. So.
That comment to me is incredibly important. And why it resonates with me is this 45-day deliverable on outcomes and metrics. What is the council going to do with that on December 15th? That is so critically important that another 2 months of investment in that wouldn't create a better product. I understand marketing. I theoretically get what marketing is about. But if we're just going to be using a early product to do expedited programming, we certainly don't need marketing to do that. The community is ready, right? And I wouldn't want to take a deliverable in December that is less polished than one that we could get in April that is dynamic.
So I do want to
fully
get to Liza.
informed and whatever.
Are you proposing that we delay the key metrics deliverable?
I wanted to hear more about why the 45-day imminent deadline was so critically important.
Okay, good point. Okay, I do want to hear from Liza because we've gone around the circle. Then I'm going to come to you for that response. Liza.
Are you going to go first? Okay. I would lean in on what you're saying, and I would suggest that the team ask the question. And first of all, I would recommend you go back and look at the questions that were asked by all the groups, because the question on timing was asked twice, but I don't remember by whom, and that might be very important. It might have been some of your top folks here who then maybe did 7 months but needed 10. So I do think you should go back and look at who asked those questions and then ask what would be your best timeline if you hadn't felt pressured. So that
Good point.
that's what I was going to respond to Daryl Jones's recommendation, which is delightful and I think is very thoughtful to include people. I unfortunately cannot, because I am already overcommitted for next week, participate. However, I have been through many ITN processes on both sides. I've been the bidder and I've been the reviewer and I've been the et cetera. It is one of the most litigious things I've ever been through in my life, and I have been through the lawsuits associated with it. And my recommendation would be make absolutely no changes. Any change that you make, if I come in and it looks like I then influenced, I wasn't on the committee, but then I was sitting behind the committee.
No.
I don't care anything you do at this point. I just would, you're the lawyer, not me. I just like to pretend to talk like one. I would recommend no changes just because I don't want you guys to have to deal with any. Okay.
Thanks for that. All right, Holly.
Um,
I'll come to you next.
I'm going to go in reverse if that's okay. Just, I just want to give a, thank you. I just want to go in reverse and just kind of give a nod to Liza, because you just made all of my anxiety about public records and publicly noticing meetings and all of that just disappear. So if that is the will of the group, then thank you, because we have already noticed the closed sessions and with names, and I don't know how to fix that with knowing my sunshine manual. So just wanted to say that. The second thing, I heard the request about understanding who asked which questions. So we will make that available to the negotiation team to aggregate that. The way it's posted on our website right now is not identified by who asked what. We will make that available to the entire team, also with the recommended revisions to the deliverables tomorrow. So to go back to those recommended deliverables, originally the 45 days had to do with the compressed timeline. So it's not that it has to be done by December. Having it done, maybe not by April, lends us to the question of, I'm going to say a phrase, I might get the phraseology wrong in terms of the idiom, but like the tail wagging the dog in terms of our community. Are we leading the effort and all of our partners are looking at us to see what we decide before they adopt theirs? Or will we be in a situation that they might all go off and do their own thing, adopt their own thing, and then here the CSC is catching up? Maybe that's not dictating it. Maybe it is. Right now they're open and they're watching and they want to see what we'll do. Does that mean December? No. Could it be January? Yes. Could it be February? That gives me pause. April, I think we would have missed the boat for their timelines. Does that mean we can't do it? It does not. The council, you guys can set exactly what we're going to do. But so I just wanted to comment on why we put it in the time frame that we did originally was because of the 5 months, but then as a follow-up, having it sooner so that we can be on board with our community partners.
Just to follow up on that, the identified entities that you walked through, CHSP, United Way, Community Foundation, 211, Sheriff, Northwest Florida Health Network, their current outcomes and metrics don't absolutely align with our priorities. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
So who's it? The informing confuses me. Why would we be informing them and why would they be informing us if we have a different set of priorities than any of their organizations?
There is a lot of crossover specifically with CHSP. And they right now are engaged in a process, actually with a vendor at FSU, to look at that and make recommendations in the next 2 months. And in our conversations with them, they are very interested when we can have those alignments. So yes, our priorities are very focused on children and youth, and they cover that and some. So for their priorities that are focused on children and youth, we have expressed a desire to align where we can. Does that answer your question? Because they're in that process right now.
I guess my concern is the we in that sentence. Is that the council has expressed the authority or staff has the desire to align?
That's a great question. Where I was describing it was from the community partners at the table. When I say we, during this whole process of it being owned by the community, there has been a desire to align where we can. That's been an expression and that's been kind of given to us throughout this entire process. This specific question, that is not a decision point that has been put before the council. The council adopted its areas of priority and then gave to the needs assessment the determination to make like how we'll measure those priorities as part of this needs assessment process. So the council will not be changing its priorities based on this information, but rather aligning and choosing those outcome measures.
So, and if I may, I think in response to that, I think the council has established priorities, but the council has not identified any specific entities or organizations or nonprofits or what have you. And I think perhaps staff, you guys engage with those groups all the time and talk about, where we are and what we're doing, but the council has not done that.
Okay, I'm sorry, Neil, then I'm coming to you.
What I was thinking in response to that is that, and what that might mean for the needs analysis is that we say, here are the needs of the community and here are things that ought to be done, if I can look at the planning aspect of that. But it will then be the role of the council to coordinate, to the extent it wishes to do so, who is already doing some of those things and which ones does this council need to fund in addition to what may be done. It seems to me that's the way to harmonize that without a lot of back and forth in the course of a 5 or 6 month research project. Is that a fair, in other words, that part of this doesn't have that much value?
Frank, do you want to answer that? Oh, Holly?
So in terms of the actual process of the ITN, and Fred, feel free to jump in on this. The way that the vendor will provide options related to funding based on those gaps that it determines for what's happening in our community. So you described the process almost how the ITN or how the needs assessment will go, but then the actual recommendations for funding, potentially we have a needs assessment committee tentatively scheduled for the spring at some point to review the results of this, and as a committee to potentially make those recommendations for funding to the council. The vendor itself will not make recommendations, but instead provide a list of options. The needs assessment committee was very clear that all of the decision-making rests with the council members and not with the teams, not with the vendor itself, but to actually provide that list of options. Then the committee says, okay, based on the needs assessment, based on the gaps analysis, based on the program inventory of what's in our community and the informative program inventory from those outside of our community for how to fill those gaps and these options, the committee would then make the recommendations.
Okay, and Mr. Jones, I would like to acknowledge you were about to make a comment.
Sure. I go back to the 45 days as well. One of the things that this process will show, as we all as persons who are engaged in different ways in these areas of concern, is that there is no present or existing infrastructure. And without the presence of infrastructure related to all of these varied needs and areas of priority, I wonder, but then I guess it goes back to what Mr. Watts described as the expertise of the respondents, that they'll be able, I guess perhaps they may see this in other communities, so they're able to respond to that. But I do think, I was concerned about the amount of time. I'm in the throes of a study of my own, and we are our greatest challenge is data collection. And I can imagine across the vast priorities, but I guess that's not for us to worry about because they've clearly made a commitment with that timeline to be able to deliver.
Right.
I just anticipate, I can imagine though that you may anticipate change orders or revisions in it once they hit the ground. Because it is a problem of collecting data from all of those, because we don't have the infrastructure in place as you find in other communities. I just thought I'd throw that out there. I think Walter's concerns and concern of Commissioner Cummings are legitimate in that regard in terms of the time. And I apologize, I have my Minority Enterprise Development Week activities that start at 4.
No worries. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Terrence, I'm going to come to you.
I will say that some of the proposals that you'll read, they articulate some of the strategies, software programs that they use or will use to help them collect some of that data. And so like you'll see with the public consulting group,
They
whatever.
give you more than you've already got
Yeah.
from the Children's Services Commission in their proposal. I'm
Right.
just
It's a
gonna
lot.
lay it on the line.
Yeah.
It's like, it's amazing what they
Yeah.
already have. You're gonna be blown away.
But we'll only get 3.
You only have 3,
Three.
right? And you only have the top
So-
3 to review,
I
so
think-
it's a
I
much
mean,
easier
To
process.
Terrence's point.
We took away the fluff.
I think the dead weight, yeah. Okay, I'm going to acknowledge Ted, and then I do want to review.
What I hear y'all saying, I think it obviously is very reasonable. And I would propose as we put together an updated deliverables that we delay by another 45 days, the outcome measures, key outcomes and measures, which would put it at the end of January. And the reason why I say that may differ a little bit from some of the discussion is that, yes, data collection is indeed it's going to take a long time to collect data. The vast majority of outcome measures and outcomes, that's literature. That's national literature, that's state literature, that stuff. What are best practices? What are the outcomes from these things? And that should be able to be done relatively quickly. But given the holiday situation that you mentioned, Mr. Fox, and everything, I think extending that sounds like a reasonable thing to do.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Comment on that.
Yeah, I did want to one thing that I was going to propose we do is during the negotiations, ask them, is this a reasonable deadline for you? And give them an opportunity to articulate how they plan to, other than what's in the proposal, how they plan to meet this 45-day deadline. If they need more time, then we can allow that if we don't feel as if their response is strong enough. But I was going to propose that we offer that as a part of the negotiations. Talk to us, but this deadline is coming up really quickly. How are you going to definitely meet this? What can you do to ensure that we have it? Do you need more time to be succinct? And I think we can negotiate that with them. Anyway, that was
Point of clarification, keep it at 45?
I was going to propose we keep it at 45, but talk to them about it and say,
Negotiate.
we realize that this can be an issue. Will you, tell us, can you definitely make this? If not, we can
Or do
negotiate.
you need more
Go ahead.
time? Right.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Walter.
Yeah, if you look at the statement of work, bottom of page 6, deliverables, there's an A, a B, and a C. Under each priority area, you have to have a key outcomes, you have to have the measures that are associated with that, and also the short, mid, and long-term performance expectations for each outcome and measure. So it's much more than just outcomes and measures. It's also performance expectations is a big deliverable. And every contract manager's hardest duty assignment box is, what is the acceptable quality level? What is the AQL under which I'm going to make payment? That's a hard decision point here. You will get something on the 45th day. You'll get something on the 90th day. Is it acceptable? Does it meet the standard? This doesn't speak to a standard. So in their proposals, my hope is that they will have identified what that looks like. And it will clearly lay out their prospective result. The person who has to manage this has to manage it to that expectation. And if that's not clear in their proposal, then we have to put it in contract writing what our expectation is. It can't stand at this sentence. There has to be more. So post negotiations, you have your selected vendor, you're into contract writing. That area needs a lot of attention if you have a short deliverable timeframe, because there's not a lot of back and forth unless you're going to allow for that. They give you a deliverable at the 90th day, you review it, you don't like it, you give it back to them, send me another one in 30 days, you don't like that one either, has another 30. Or do you need it at the 90th day because you got to do something with it? Now it becomes a problem if it's not acceptable. So do you get a draft before the 90th day so that somebody can vet it through a committee and give them some feedback? It's a lot of contracting drama there, but it's important stuff.
Right, and if I would just say, it's important, every schedule, it's the activity, the sequence, and the duration. What do you do? How long does it take? And what order do you do it in? So before we need to understand what role that deliverable plays in the rest of the project before you say, okay, it can wait till day 90 as opposed to day 45. And Walter, in their responses, it's in section, the service description 2A, I think, just so you can focus on it quickly. But we need to understand how that impacts what else happens on the project before we just agree to move that. That would be my recommendation, because if that sets the target and we all agree, we'll march off in this direction, you can't change your mind later if they've spent 2 months marching in that direction. It'll come back to bite council. So we need to be clear on what that deliverable is going to be and what impact it's going to have on the rest of the project.
So one thing that I'm not clear on, and I've heard multiple people say it today, is when will the council be making specific decisions? Because that really determines how we lay out this timeline. And it's hard for me to think into the future. I mean, what decisions are we making when? And I guess my request to the staff is, can you all help us think through, as we move forward, what are we going to be doing, in 4 months? What are we going to be doing in 6 months? What are we going to do in 8 months? And what type of information do we need to inform those decisions? Then that helps us kind of stick them with a timeline that will inform the decisions we need to make. Does that make sense? Okay. Is everybody in agreement with that? I think that's an important thing. for us to
What
do.
I would say is that's going to be, on day 15, your project governance documents
Right.
is when this, not the negotiation team, but the agency
Right.
needs to commit to that, because you're accepting a deliverable that lays all that out. I'll tell you, this is a risky, if you put yourself in the service provider's shoes for a second. How do they see this? They're coming into a startup agency who's in the process of swapping out an executive director.
Yeah.
They don't even know who they're going to be trying to please yet, right? And they're doing it on a short timeline, 5 months, 2 of which are, traditionally holiday months. It's a risky proposition if you're a service provider. So they're going to want to make sure, and to Mr. Jones's point about getting the data. If I'm the service provider, I'm negotiating next week. Look, if I can't get the data because these other sister agencies of yours won't give it to me, I can't be held responsible for that. Like he said, they're committing to getting it done, and it'll be their responsibility. They're going to tell you, if I can't get the data out of these other organizations, I can't be held responsible. That's what you're going to hear next week from them. So we need to be ready and think about those project governance documents. Like, I said earlier, the deliverable expectation document, like, what are going to be the acceptance criteria? How are we going to know to say yes and we're going to pay for it? Who needs to be involved in that process so everybody buys in and you can't change your mind later, or if you do, it'll cost you. How is that going to work is what they're going to be looking to hear from you next week. And I think the best we can do is punt and say, hey, you win the contract and we'll work that all out in the first 2 weeks. You got to be ready to have your people here. And, whether it's Holly or whoever the agency project manager is, or the project management team, and they're going to ask, well, does the council need to approve our deliverables? You can say, well, we'll answer that in the first 2 weeks of the project. You don't necessarily have to answer it next week, but that's an important question. And maybe they don't need to approve every deliverable,
Right.
but, just from a project management plus from a political perspective, how much do you want to nail down now versus how much can you wait and flesh out in those first couple of weeks with your chosen provider? They're going to be pushing to absolve themselves of as much responsibility. I think what you want to do from a strategy perspective is get them to say, we're going to get you to commit in the first 2 weeks. You need to understand, we're not going to nail that down now, but these project governance documents, that's all going to be fleshed out. And there's going to be a roadmap that's going to apply to this project, and you have to be ready to agree to it. Now, you don't know what that is yet,
Yeah.
but we're just asking you to commit to fleshing that out in the first 2 weeks. And maybe they might tell you we can never do that in 2 weeks. That'll take a month. Or they might say, we'll do it in a week. But that's an important part of this project, getting off on the right foot.
Right.
Is,
Yeah.
And in light of that, if we're talking about actual meeting dates, when is the next meeting of the council?
So if I may, Madam Chair, that's exactly when we did the compressed timeline. We absolutely took all of those decision points into consideration. While there has not been formal discussion on will the council approve each deliverable, which is something that we hope to have outlined at the October 21st meeting to be very cut and dry and clear going into finalizing that contract. How it was set up with the compressed timeline would be so at least staff or the project manager is presenting to council right within a week of each of those deadlines due. So that's how it's scheduled. And I wrote down in my notes, based on your earlier comment, Mr. Sachs, about making sure that the revised timeline that we provide to you is relevant to council decision making. So we will absolutely be considering that even in the revised version that might allow for a 6 to 8 month project timeline instead of 5.
So if on Monday we're meeting with the vendors and they say that a governance document deliverable of November 15th doesn't meet our abilities, we need to really probably do that December 15. That could align with a December board meeting, not the November board meeting. That's the idea, is if you had to go before the council, you could do 30-day increments and still meet the next board meeting timeframes.
That is correct. And I can add to the list of documents that we provide to the negotiation team, the scheduled meetings that we have, just so that you have it in your back pocket in case you want to reference it. And myself and Mr. Granger and Mr. Springer will be present throughout the entire negotiation period if you have questions for staff.
That's important. Thank you.
So Madam Chair, can I just for clarification? So once a vendor is selected and we have pretty much negotiated the terms and what have you, we will submit that to the full council for their agreement and approval. Is that
At the
correct?
next board meeting, at the next council meeting.
In November.
No,
October.
it's in October.
Oh, in
a couple-
October, the
yeah, next
21st.
2 weeks.
The 21st.
So in
okay.
terms of your expected timeline of what your team will do, just so we're clear, on Monday, we have the Leon County Public Library reserved from 10 to 5. We're going to talk about that proposed format. I've reserved it the entire day with 3 vendors. The team will decide if that's the appropriate amount of time. On Tuesday, the 12th, we have reserved over at DCF, thanks to Mr. Sachs, 9 to 11. And that's more of the strategy session to determine what we want to put in our format for the best and final, which is outlined in the ITN, and I will allow Mr. Springer to elaborate on momentarily. Then we come back, we provide that to all the vendors for them to give us their kind of best and final. We come back on Thursday, the 14th, in this space from 1 to 3 again, and kind of review all of those. As soon as we have them, we'll turn them around. And in that meeting is where you're going to make the formal recommendation of who you want to present to council at the meeting on the 21st. At the 21st, I assume your chairperson will make that recommendation. And then the council will approve or push back or whatever they'll do. Assuming that they approve, then ideally we'll have a contract executed as of on November 1st. The first deliverable is those governance documents, which were due within 15 days, outlining the procedures and the processes. And then we would present that deliverable, staff would present that deliverable to the council at your November meeting, which I believe, without looking at my clock, is the 18th. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's the 18th. And so for it to kind of approve.
Thank you for reviewing that, because I wanted to make sure everybody had those dates. Ms. Cummings?
Yes, I just wanted to ask if we have a recommendation and we have our meeting on the 21st, do we anticipate the vendor being here, making a short presentation to the council? I think that would be helpful.
We did talk about that at some point. Do we plan to bring them local? Because I think there were some concerns about the vendor being present for negotiations. And especially if they're an out-of-town vendor, and then having them have to come back. And there was a request for the possibility of a Zoom, right? I remember that. So what did we decide? I don't remember.
For the purposes of the negotiation, we did require in at least one member of the team, the primary member of the team, to be present physically for the negotiations and then to Zoom in their team members. I believe that one of the 3 that you have selected has made the request to Zoom in. I believe it's Public Consulting Group. Please let me confirm that. For that, the others have not made any requests, so I assume that they will be in person. To your point of October 21st, the ability to Zoom them in for a brief presentation, it's not prohibited by our rules and regulations. And depending upon who you select, I'm sure that that's a possibility. And the technology in this room would certainly support it.
I wasn't really thinking about Zooming. I was thinking about perhaps if they would be here, but I think perhaps give them the option.
Right.
But I think it would be great if
I
a
think
representative could be here.
Yeah, that they're here for negotiations. We wanted to give them the option for Zooming to be present
Right.
for the council meeting.
Right.
Okay.
Holly, could you hit the timeline again post the 14th? The 14th is a meeting decide
Formal
Who the final
recommendation.
vendor is.
for the final or the best and final offer.
So that's where you will review the best and final submissions and make your selection on the 14th.
So on Monday, when they leave here, they will get a request from us for a
It
BAFO
will
or
technically be on Tuesday morning.
Tuesday?
after we
So
meet,
we're gonna have a
48-hour
we're gonna have a
turnaround.
meeting On Tuesday at DCF. Post that meeting, they will get a request for a BAFO.
And that's how it was described in the ITN with the
It will-
48-hour
It will come
turnaround.
to us when?
48 hours later.
Which is the morning of the 14th or the
Yes.
afternoon of the 14th?
Yes.
Which is when we're meeting.
Yes.
So we will be reviewing their BAFOs in a meeting,
We will have them presented to us. Yes.
and we will be deciding in that meeting who to recommend for the 21st.
That is correct.
So I'm trying to imagine, is there a time window when we would have a little bit more time to read the BAFO before a meeting on the BAFO?
No.
I just worry that that's an incredible vacuum on the 14th to read, digest, and make a decision. I mean, it's a consumption time to read an offer, and you got 3 of them potentially, unless somebody backs out. That's a big task.
Right, and if I can jump in,
Right.
Holly, I would say 2 things, because you have to add another effort on that day, which is to reduce the decision to writing, which, staff can support, but we need to have a well-articulated written.
Best
decision.
value determination.
Yeah, but what you're describing informs what we request of them. We don't want another 100-page proposal as your
Right.
final proposal. So when we're thinking, what do we ask them? What do we get out of them on Monday, face to face? And then what do we ask them to on Tuesday? What do we ask back from them? You definitely want to consider how much time we have to, consume it
And
sense of it.
once that decision is made, then staff go to contract drafting with that provider?
Ideally, the way it's set up, the contract's drafted.
Understood, but
Yeah.
there may
It's
be
already-
stuff you have to drop in based on their response. That would be handled by staff. We're not
Yes.
going to be writing on the 14th,
Correct.
is what I'm getting
Yeah,
at,
right.
right?
Yeah,
I'm
we
trying to-
have the
I'm
format.
trying to
Right,
make sure
yeah.
that meeting's not this
Yeah.
No.
big
The only
bomb.
thing the team would be, quote unquote, writing is because it would be a memo probably from the lead negotiator, reducing the recommended decision to writing. So we'd want to make sure that everybody was comfortable since that memo speaks for the team. But again, if you just dictate, here's our basis, go write it up, then, staff could handle the writing up and, come back to you and you can sign it. But that needs to get done pretty quickly because that has to go to Ted. That has to get fed into the, committee timeline process, the council timeline process. So that's going to move quickly.
I do have a question for you. At the end of the negotiations day, when they leave on Monday, so more than likely, we will have 3 very specific asks for each of the vendors, correct? I mean, these are the things that we want you to come back to us, and each one of those could be completely and totally different. And then when we get those, we're reviewing the entire package, considering the fact that these were the things that we wanted them to come back and respond to. Is that correct?
I would think that the meeting on Tuesday would identify what they need to respond to, not the meetings on Monday.
Right. Monday informs what you then debrief on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, we do our
Tuesday.
debriefing.
Yeah.
We're
Okay.
pulling together what we want them all 3 to react to.
Okay.
I mean,
It's
there
largely
might
one
be-
list though, right?
Yes, it
Okay.
should, because the beauty of the ITN is grabbing the nuggets of
Right.
value, right?
Right.
Which was one of my questions to the evaluators before they leave
Yeah.
today, is what is this most highlightable strength from each
one,
vendor
sure.
that we want to make sure we drop into the final deal? I want that question at least addressed if we can, but that's the beauty of Tuesday, is you may even hear something on Monday that's different than their response to the ITN,
Okay.
that you say, oh my goodness, that has to be in the final, and let's get everybody to respond to it.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Thank you. I
And
just
and
wanted
they
to-
may leave Monday because you might know just in the course of what happens on Monday that you're going to ask for it. So if we can just say, hey, you're going to get the request for final offer Tuesday, but I can tell you based on today, it's going to include this. That gives them the chance to, be gathering it. So you want to use Monday to get as much as you can
Sure.
from them.
And we have it, oh, sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead, Holly, and then I'll come to.
We have it tentatively set up in terms of the schedule for Monday that you'll have, a solid period of time with each vendor and then have a working lunch so that we can have those opportunities to make some discussions while we're consuming lunch and connecting with one another after we've heard all 3 of them. And then the ability to do any follow-up questions. So you'll have a second time period with each of the vendors. Again, you might want more, you might want less, or we might know after the first round, wow, we really don't want this group at all. However you guys decide, but tentatively, you'll have a big chunk of time in the morning, working lunch together to convene, share questions, things like that. And then in the second round, a shorter kind of compressed period of time. And we have currently built in a little bit of debrief so that when we go into the meeting on Tuesday, hopefully staff can have a draft ready for you. At least a working draft so that we can then just tweak during that Tuesday meeting so that when we finish that meeting, we'll be able to turn that best and final around to the vendors that to get it to them in an expeditious manner.
So in the Monday day, there's a built-in strategy session midterm that we might even shortlist at that point.
But perhaps, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Liza.
I was going to suggest having done this with various state agencies, the format can vary tremendously. Department of Lottery tends to be very free-flowing. Hey, take 20 minutes, tell us about what you're going to do. And then, they kind of pick questions at you. And I've done it with the Department of Health, less free-flowing. I've done it with the Department of Education, not free-flowing at all. everybody has the same questions in the same order, you know? So there's a lot of different ways that you all could do this. And I just hadn't heard you discuss what your format's going to be. And I thought you guys might want to think about that a little bit before you walk in on Monday.
Our lead negotiator is going to ask all questions.
You were the one that nominated me.
We knew what Xander's was doing this weekend.
I'm going to turn this over to Walter.
That resolves it.
I know. That's a good point, though. Ted.
Yeah.
I sent a draft of this today to Mr. Springer and Ms. McFadden. And what I have.
I'm not Liza, I'm Holly.
McPhail, sorry about that, with a PH. And so I have not heard their responses yet. So thank you for raising the question. At this point, I have an hour, which is short, with a 20-minute presentation, and then 40 minutes of Q&A. I haven't looked at the time frame. Holly had put together a break on if we had 2, if we had 3, if we had 4 negotiations going on. So I haven't tied that in. Obviously, an hour is too short, I think. So given the time frame of how the day breaks with regard to breaks, same amount of time for each team and a little bit of discussion time for y'all, we'll fit that into it. I assume as kind of a foundational thing, you'd like a presentation, and then you'd like the remainder of time for Q&A for each vendor. Is there more to it than that?
Are we allowed to debrief after each one? Because after each question and answer period, I would like for the negotiators to kind of, what were some of the major things, to give us an opportunity to debrief before we go into the next group. Is that allowed? I just want to make sure. Okay, good.
Holly's just told me based on timing, and so based on timing, that it may be that there needs to be just a time at lunch and a time later in the day, because of the way we need to break and allow them to go to lunch and have lunch and all that kind of stuff.
But you could give them 50 minutes and then take 10 minutes for debriefing and do it that way. So, I would say, just to make sure I understand, because an hour.
Can you turn on your microphone? Sorry.
Are we doing?
Lead in. Thanks.
You can take your mask off, please.
Are
Brad.
is the plan to do morning sessions and then have lunch and then bring them the same 3 back for afternoon sessions? Okay.
As I understand it, each vendor would be subject to 2 interrogations.
But you can do 50 minutes, 10-minute debrief, or, 5-minute debrief, 5-minute break, and then go. And an hour, that's 3 hours plus breaks. So that's, 9 to noon in the morning. So an hour doesn't sound like much, but it is when you're dealing with 3 firms.
Okay.
So
why do we interrogate them twice? So do we, after we hear from the others and pull out what we want, then we go back and, okay.
Yeah, it's primarily a follow-up to either address something that you needed further clarification on, or to drop in a new idea and see how they react to it. If you heard something from a different vendor. I'm okay with the 20-minute presentation idea, but it absolutely has to be cut off at 20 minutes. And if they don't get to everything, they don't get to everything, because they can't take our 40 or now 30 away from us, right? It's got to be tight.
A question, Madam
Please,
Chair?
yes.
Given your experience and the experience of others at the table who've had it, is 20 minutes too long? Should they be able to do it in 15 or 10?
I don't think, because they haven't had a presentation opportunity yet, they weren't presenting to the evaluation team, offering them a 20-minute time frame is valuable to them. If they are good, they know what to do with it. And if they're really good, they won't take all 20. So we'll see, but we got to cut them off at 20 is my point.
And I would say it's nice to be good to them, but it's really you.
Yeah.
If you feel like you can read, you have 3 proposals in 3 days. If you feel, not to me, having sat on both sides of a lot of these, nothing's worse than sitting through a dog and pony show presentation of written materials. I've read your proposal. I don't need some presentation of it. So now sometimes there is value and you do it, but you know, I'm much more scripted in negotiations, and I don't need your fluff or your sales pitch. I'm ready to cut right to the chase. So I might do 5 minutes for team introductions. Don't repeat. If I only have 60 minutes, I wouldn't give them 20. I wouldn't give them 10.
I think if we
to
had the
repeat
advantage
what's in the
of,
proposal.
I think if we had the advantage of giving them something to present on,
Right,
we would be in a better position.
right.
But having not read the proposals, I'm in a very bad position of asking, PCG, I need you to clarify X.
And what I've
Q and Q,
done,
I
and
need
this
you to
is,
do
this
this.
is, and you can come up with, what I've done in the past is everybody has to start with, what do you perceive as the 3 greatest project risks and how would you address them? So you can give them a brand new question
Yeah,
and
I think
speak
that's
to
a
that.
brilliant idea. My questions were going to be around risks and barriers. So if we had that as a minimum in their proposal, that would be a great way to keep them out of the dog and pony arena.
Right.
Okay, so I'm hearing a 10-minute presentation for them to just kind of say who they are, what, some of their major things. And then we have some very specific questions that they would get in advance, is what I'm understanding, that they would be prepared to answer to. And then the total length of time for them, including the answer to these questions, would be about 20 minutes. Is that correct?
Yes, again, I would say you do not have to give them any time to present what they've already presented.
Okay, so we
in
can just leave
writing,
that out
but it's
altogether. Okay.
it's your time, so you want to get as much out of them. You only have 3 days with the written material, so
Yeah.
maybe you do want them to highlight what they think is important. That's really up to you. That's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
I would not dedicate any of it to fluffy, salesy.
Okay, so
stuff.
no presentation
Yeah.
from here.
Well,
Okay, Liza.
So I would say, and I have presented to multiple agencies and I've also been on the other side. I do think the presentation piece is important for you, and I'm going to tell you why. 2 things.
Will you
One-
please take your mask off?
Sure. One, I think you get to know the people because when they present, you see their personalities, you see if they're able to respond to you, how they're interacting with you is much how they're going to interact with the community. So I do think the presentation piece is important. I think 10 minutes is too short personally. They've got to introduce themselves and then they've got to, I do think the question of, we want this presentation to be around X is great. And then I've never gotten the questions in advance.
Okay.
And I don't know, Walter, if you have, but I know that they're I've gotten the questions, meaning the team, when I'm on the team, but the outsiders have never gotten the questions.
Okay.
I meant I think we were talking about questions that came from today.
Okay,
that we're
yes.
Like a time frame, the new timeline.
Yes, those we've
They
had
would
it.
know that they need to address that on Monday.
Mhm.
My question back to Ted and Holly is, in the thought of having 2 scenarios where was it an hour each for each of the 2? So if we had the luxury of adjusting that, an hour and a half with each initially, with potentially a half hour later, is that something that could be done?
So because of the timing that we're starting at 10 a.m. Instead of 9 a.m., and that's due to the Leon County Public Library, just FYI. So we're starting at 10 a.m. and it really is a function of how attentive you are and breaking and when, and kind of the time frame. So we could absolutely do 2 vendors with a longer period of time, break for lunch, and then bring in the 3rd. But as a function of just our bodies, it was really looking at 1 hour with each of them, break for lunch, and then have up to 45 minutes with each of them again in the afternoon. That's how it's currently set up, but and that comports with everything that you're describing here in terms of a presentation, Q&A, and all of that. If you
So-
extend it beyond that, it would interfere a little bit with our natural rhythms.
But if we went for a 10 to 11:30 with the first vendor, then did whatever breaking we needed to do, and then had 1.5 hours in the afternoon, that could be done.
It definitely could be done,
We
and
just
then
wouldn't have a follow-up session if we did that.
you could still have a follow-up session. They would just be shorter.
And they'd have to wait longer.
They would.
Potentially from when they did their first presentation.
And all of the firms have been communicated with. The top 3 have not yet been communicated with, but all of the firms have been communicated with. knowing that it would be a full day process. So that was communicated.
Ms. Cummings?
Yes, so you guys had envisioned all three that morning, break for lunch perhaps at 1, and then bringing them back at increments, all three that afternoon.
Yes, and we've made arrangements for them if they wanted to stay on campus to have their own rooms set up. They could bring in lunch if they wanted to. So we have space to account for that as well. So yes, that's exactly how we and we also wanted to bring in lunch as opposed to physically breaking so that we could converse.
That
Continue.
was my
right.
question.
I
We do
like
a
that.
work
That's how we
time.
planned for it. But if we wanted to do the 10-minute debrief, but it could be that, you know, you hear something from vendor 2 and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. And we put that on the list of priorities. So, you know, you want to ask vendor 1 about that
Then you go
again,
back.
but then 3, or, hey, maybe those 2 should merge or whatever it might be. That's why we really wanted to build that time in for you guys to share after hearing from all of them.
So a possibility would be the hour, like you have originally set up, the break for lunch. And then prior to another hour with each, we have 15 minutes to talk with ourselves and then 45 minutes to talk to them.
She's thinking
So,
that.
so that way we're not
happens.
doing that at the end of the first, but we're doing it prior to the second.
So instead of doing it over lunch,
Instead of, well,
Oh, we could do it over lunch.
Yeah,
we could do
mean,
it.
I had it like,
Yeah,
you guys
I'm
would,
with that.
like, we would bring lunch to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Sounds
that.
like if this is, because we are starting an hour early, and if we do an hour, lunch, say noonish, we only get 2 in. Perhaps we could do one at 10, one at 11, 10, one at 12, 15, eat at 1:15 to 1:45 if that's not too late, or 2, and then do the 45 minutes after, and then have a little bit of time left over
That's what it's.
to determine.
Then you might
That's
not bring
exactly
everybody
what
back.
it's-
Eating
Yeah,
at
I like
1:45
the-
At 1?
You know,
I bet you won't.
It's true.
Okay.
Bet you on what?
I
Bring
bet you
everybody
won't bring
back.
all 3 back.
yeah, I think it would be beneficial to us to hear all 3 back to back. Have the benefit of debriefing over lunch. Then we would have the afternoon, because we would have heard all 3. If there are any issues or questions, as Walter has mentioned, then we have an opportunity. And I think it's more fair to them as well, rather than hearing 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning, 1 after we've eaten and we're sluggish.
Yeah.
I just think it's more fresh and
we
crisp
could,
in our
we
minds.
could,
and
we
better
could
to do them
reverse
all in
the order
morning.
and make the first one wait till the end to, you get to go first, but you also get to
Yeah.
go last.
Right to the end.
After lunch, right.
Well, the other option is if you like the presentation and there's value in the presentation, is do the morning ones shorter. Give them a half hour, they get, you know, and that first one, so you hear them all at once while everyone's awake and, you know, you're all fresh and you're not starving
Time
like
for
of the third one.
negotiations.
So the first round is, you know, 15 minutes of presentation, 15 minutes of initial questions, you're done. And then we could get them all in, then have lunch, then have longer sessions in the afternoon. I mean, there's whatever works best for you guys are the ones who
I
are.
do too. I like the shorter ones in the morning with them. Let's just hear from them, give them an opportunity to respond to what we're asking them to do. We break, we talk, and then we
What is
then we
the time?
negotiate.
What's the time frame you built in between each person coming in the room?
5 minutes.
5 minutes for them to get out and the other ones to get in?
Yeah,
Mm.
because
That's a tight
they'll all
window.
be given a space there on site.
Except for the Zoom. There's one Zoomer, right?
No, they will have a person in person. They will
Okay.
have a physical delegate there for their team, and then they will be Zooming in the
The
rest.
other members.
Which, if we go with the shorter versions for the purpose of public health breaks, that's probably a smarter solution. Because if you have to sit for 3 hours with no breaks, that's a challenge.
Eating lunch at 2, you're going to be cranky.
So yeah,
Okay.
it's probably a better solution to do the
Yeah,
short
I
windows.
like that.
So I totally anticipated that you might do that. I haven't sent this one to Ted, but I do have that in my back pocket and can accommodate that if that's the will of the group.
Okay. It
So-
sounds like that's, Neil, are you opposed to that?
No. I think that's fine. 30 minutes seems short. I wonder if it could be 45, but I think the idea is sound
Mhm.
and fits because we have a 10 o'clock start time, right?
It does. I think the one I did was 35 minutes to allow you for, I'm going to call it 5 minutes of fluff because I might have actually wrote that word, but now that I'm hearing the way Mr. Springer's talking about it, not fluff from that, but just the agenda is somewhat scripted, not for the questions that you'll ask, but some of the procedural stuff that you'll need to go over to let everyone know the expectations. So it's really 30 minutes of content presentation, but 5 minutes of you introducing the folks that are in the room, the expectations of the day. And then, so it's a 35-minute with a 5-minute buffer that takes us to a right around a 12 o'clock lunch. If I remember, it might be 12:05 to take us to that lunchtime period. And then we would bring them back. I did in the afternoon though, only do 45 minutes. Still, I thought, so the total time that they would then have is an hour and 15 minutes. But then I left it open and I called it final callbacks so that if, for example, around the 4 o'clock hour, you really, oh man, I really want clarity from one more time, that we would ask them to come back, but it wouldn't be a set time. So I wanted to give the team that flexibility for that kind of last hour.
Okay. So tell me, repeat, what are we doing? We're doing the shorter interviews in the morning. They have 15 minutes to do a presentation, right? And then we have some very specific questions that we will ask them. And then that will be the 30-minute chunk of time that they have. Then they leave, we have 5 minutes, the next group comes in and we do that consecutively for 3 of them. Then we break for lunch, where we convene and kind of debrief and talk through it. And then we have them for 45 minutes each in the afternoon, where we have specific questions for them for like final negotiations.
Correct. And then built in time at the very end for final callbacks,
Right.
should the team require it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that could very well be our sort of working choice if we had one. I mean, we could spend more time with one. It sounds like if we were able somehow in all of this little time to have a consensus, maybe we just look at each other.
I think it will be helpful for the vendors just in that laying out when we communicate to them that they'll have a dedicated time in the morning and in the afternoon. As much as we can time that, especially for the one that's going to be zooming in folks, I think that would be helpful. But you're right, that last hour is whatever you want it to be.
Okay.
But there's not a fairness requirement at that point to say, I got to spend 10 more minutes with each one. We can now then say, I just really want to spend time with X, Y, Z.
I'll let Fred
so.
answer
Is
that.
that fair?
Yeah, so
Walter?
different agencies take different approaches to that. So I'm of the view that they're not all entitled to the same exact time. Some agencies would do it differently. What I would say though, in this instance, given the timing and given the award authority lies with the council, while you can leave some in the dust, particularly if this was a 5-month negotiation process like agencies sometimes do, it's a tremendous effort to do it. Here, you're only talking about 2-day period. I would recommend that you keep them all in and you get final offers from all of them. Just in theory, the council could say no to your recommendation and want to go with somebody else. If you want to keep this on track, I think it's best to have options so that if the council does not adopt the recommendation, they want to go with someone else, that contract, there's nothing left to do. It's done, it's signed, and the project goes on. So.
And Fred, for clarity, just in case folks aren't involved in the process, getting to this round is interesting. It is now a very level playing field. Scores are meaningless at this point.
Right.
All 3 are
Which is what the
equally
ITN
qualified
says.
to this
Yeah.
round. If the council does determine that the award can't go to any of these 3, the other ones who are still trailing in the field are not left out. They're still eligible to come back to the table. They just have to be invited back at some point. So in the ITN process, it's very unique in that you're sort of never eliminated until the final award is made.
Right.
So if you did down select, which I agree with you, I think it's probably not fair to do that in a 1-day event. You wouldn't be leaving anybody out. You just wouldn't be moving them forward in the process. But I think it's always important to coach folks up about once you get to the next step, there's no priority.
Right.
They're all
Yeah.
3 equal
Right.
going to the next level.
Right.
Good point. Okay, guys.
I have one final point.
Go ahead, Holly.
All of the team members, you would have received an email from Mr. Travis Schroeder, and it's going to give you access to an FTP site. I'm going to send you kind of a description, but he's already sent the email, so it's in your inbox right now. That gives you access to the final 3 or the top 3 respondents. So that's there, it's accessible. So as soon as you leave here, you'll click on the link. It will ask you to enter your username and password or create a password to go in and be able to access the files. So I just wanted you to know that it's there. If you have any trouble accessing it, please let me know. You should have my phone number available, and I can help troubleshoot with you. In a pinch, we can get it to you. Ted can get it those responses to you.
So I can't take the ones Dr. Bolden's already highlighted.
Nope.
I would suggest on this, you can go back and forth into it, is go ahead and just download them.
Yeah.
That way they're on your hard drive, and then you can go back and forth on them very easily over the weekend.
So I still had the remaining question
Yes,
for
I
the
have that. I have
evaluators
that on my list.
about if there was a strong point from any of the vendors, doesn't have to be all 3, but if there was something that you said, if I was on the negotiation team, this is what I would be focused on for all 3 to have in the final solution. Is there something that just screamed at you as a best practice, a high value item, something that was robust that we should be carrying forward?
Yeah. I'm going to ask each of the evaluators to respond to that because I think that's a valid question. And I do think we briefly touched on that when we were talking about the things that were important to us. Terrence, I'm going to pick on you and we'll just go on around and.
No problem. So for me, my top 3 were actually Public Consulting Group was my number 1 pick. And then my other option that met the top 3 was Q&Q. So what stood out to me for Q&Q, the one thing for Q&Q was in regards to their experience creating other similar or working with other CSCs in the community in Florida. And so that did stand out to me.
And
that,
I want to be real clear what I'm asking for. If you saw something in their proposal that you want us to put in the contract, that's what I'm looking for, is a highlight from their solution.
In other words, what can we take from theirs?
Like if they
and
said,
make-
we're going to do a field study using this technique, and you went, oh my God, that's going to really get it there.
okay,
If there's something in there that came out, not what their qualifications are,
I
as
see.
much as what their, I don't know what it's
A
called.
good idea,
A good idea.
an innovation, yeah.
Yeah.
okay, sure. So what stood out for me for Q&Q and was also maybe one of my concerns was in regards to the community engagement. How effective was their community engagement going to be, such as they put in their proposal that they were going to use a certain amount of money to attract community engagement through the use of gift cards. I would want to know more about the value of that process, what experience they've had and success they've had with using that approach in other areas, because it was a considerable amount of the resources that they were going to use out of the actual funding that they proposed. So that was important for me for the Q&Q. For the Public Consulting Group, also along the similar lines, even though that was my top pick, I would want to know how they planned on, even though they're not local and they're a large corporation, how they were going to almost match that same approach of the community engagement. So they reference how they have the experience in doing that and they're capable of doing that. But I wanted to know more about how they plan on getting boots on the ground. I don't remember seeing that they were going to do the similar approach of getting the buy-in or using various approaches of gift cards, or whatnot to get that, but they did reference how they would reference focus groups. So I wouldn't want to know for those 2 things.
And that was who?
That was the Public Consulting Group.
He was chief, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
For me, in terms of Public Consulting Group, they have an assessment that they already use, a tool that talked specifically about youth engagement. And I thought that was actually pretty cool because they have already done this before and have already did have the analytics study. I thought that's something that we can, specifically to your question, you can bring up. And if that's something that they all can do. In terms of Q&Q, which also was in my top 3, they talked about the quantitative and qualitative analysis that they have already done and the methodology that they already have in place, which almost speaks to the assessment that they have in place. And I think if both of them can bring that to the table, I think that is really meaningful too. But PCG specifically talked about that assessment that they have already used as it relates to youth. Q&Q didn't do that though. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bolden. Liza.
Okay, on public consulting, I thought a best practice was that they were very much focused on other languages and diversity. And so they had translations services put in. I didn't see that in a lot of the others. So that they were very thoughtful about their community impact and how they would do that. I mentioned earlier that I thought they best aligned the type of people to the type of work, and that would just be something that, you know, as a general messaging I would do. They also had some really interesting geo mapping. George Washington University, if you're familiar with ACEs, they aligned all their work on ACEs research work, which meant that they were thinking very carefully about how to align programming to outcomes. And they probably did that, in my mind, better than anyone else. I would, again, my concern with George Washington, I know you're just asking about best practices, if they can do that in health, can they do that with everything else? I did look at their website, and that did have housing, education, and equity in there, so I think that they can. But again, I think that ACEs, their ability to take research and really look at it and get it to go all the way through to program and assessment was great. And so I would ask about the ACEs. And then with Q&Q, I'll be honest with you, they didn't really stand out to me the way the other two did. I didn't really have a best practice off of them.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes.
Just to be clear on the question, because not to speak for you, Walter, but again, it's if there was a great idea in any of the other 5 proposals, I think you want to hear about it, because the negotiation team won't be reading those, but under the ITN, you can require these finalists to address. So if you saw another great idea and you're like, wow, man, that'd be great. I wish one of my top 3 had offered it. I think that's what Walter might be asking for.
Okay.
Not you have to like go through each of the 5 responses and say what you thought was strong about it. But if there's something that was in those other responses, you guys have put a lot of time into this exercise. Like, you know more about this than any of us, Matt, at this point.
Sure.
What do the negotiators need to know that you can transfer that knowledge while we're together?
Downs and Cert German research, they talked about their collaboration, and they was going to do some subcontracting with Whole Child Leon, which I thought specifically addresses your question. And I think that collaboration and making sure that they connect with community aspects here in different entities in this
They had
community.
a national nonprofit they were subcontracted to who was doing
Children
it all
funding.
pro bono.
Yeah,
Who
yeah.
was that? Do you remember?
That
Because I thought that was one of the reasons
That's the
when
same
they
one I
were linked
thought,
number 4, the only reason I would have moved them forward would be to take that best practice of that free nonprofit
Right.
and
Yeah.
add it into another group.
I looked at that though. If you push on the numbers, it was 3% of their budget. So I'm not exactly
Well,
sure what
okay,
they
so
were
they're
going to
paying
do,
an
but
admin
yeah, but
fee
it
or
was the
something.
children's funding project.
Yep, that's exactly what it was
It
called.
did have a role. So if
Small
you were
percentage.
impressed by what role they
Mhm.
played, that might be something that you could ask. I even forget what they did. Again, I didn't read the service descriptions, but
I want to give you an opportunity to hear what kind of stood out for me. Yeah. So for PCG, they were very specific about how they were going to do these focus groups, and they separated them by groups. So 5 provider focus groups, 3 for families, and 2 specifically for youth. So they didn't just say we're doing these focus groups. They had very specific populations and how they were going to address those different populations. So that stood out for me. And then the translation was big for me too. They're bringing in a translator group. They acknowledge the different languages and the impact of that at the community level. So I thought that was really strong in their ability. So those are the two major things that stood out for me. For Q&Q, I really like the diversity that they brought to the table. So I just want to highlight that. They have a young lady on their team that has actually worked with the CSC before, who now works with them. And I thought that her level of experience was going to be significant to inform the work that they do. So that was something, I wouldn't say that's a best practice, but that was something that was a highlight for me. And then I really liked their community engagement. Now, unlike Terrence, he didn't like the idea of gift cards. I love the idea of gift cards simply because of the experience that I've had in the past. I've done work at a community health center. We use gift cards to get the patients with diabetes in the room, and they only came for those gift cards, but I held them hostage for an hour, right? Because they were expecting those gift cards and they came, and I was able to have an impact, right? So when I saw the gift cards, right, I said, that was to me a good method to get the real community members in the room. They emphasize that. They're going at the community level. They want to talk to the people on the ground, not just the service providers. So that was a best practice for me. And I heard his difference in opinion, and I was like, okay, I get it. But I know that from experience that worked for me. With which group is this? George Washington. Once again, the focus on the ACEs. I thought that was very important. How they really talk ACEs. Adverse childhood events, right?
Okay.
Absolutely. And the fact that they have a strong handle on that and the impact of those on their ability to have an impact on the program, I thought that was good. One other major thing, and this was kind of what led to my comment about my driver's license. You know, they said we will analyze the data, but we won't rely solely on existing data. There are so many biases that's in the collection and the design of current data. And so they will look at existing data, but they want to go get their own data to be able to analyze that. And just the thought process of going through that, I thought was really strong. What bothered me for them, they don't have a lot of time here on the ground in Tallahassee, and that's what bothered me. For that to really, truly happen, we're going to have to see some blood, sweat, and tears here on Leon County soil, so I just wanted to get on to them and really talk about how they plan to have more, boots on the ground here to be able to engage the community. But those were some of the major.
Madam Chair, I agree with you holistically with that last thought, and that's why I didn't score as high as I did. But also the one from Q&Q, the young lady who have a background with Children's Service Council, she also serves, I believe, as a COO in Miami-Dade. Beyond the fact that she did the work with, what she did on this side of it, she actually knows the background as an active, employee now.
Absolutely.
To Fred's point, was there any other vendor other than the partnership that had the pro bono that had a best?
It's night and day.
But I meant that had a best practice. that you
No,
saw.
they should not have spent the paper.
Yeah.
Some of them.
There was one, it was just a resume pusher. I mean, we saw research after research, but never told us what they were going to do. It was just, it was night and day. You got the best of the best. We took the fluff away.
This has been great. It's been valuable.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You guys
Fred has the floor. I'm sorry,
Neil.
Neil. I'm sorry.
Neil, Fred, they're all attorneys.
Yeah, I know. I apologize.
No, I was just going to ask, some of you know ACEs is sort of one of my things, and I just wondered if anybody else talked about that in their proposal.
No, they were the only one.
They were the
Talked
only
about
ones?
what? I'm sorry.
ACEs.
ACEs, adverse
ACEs.
childhood
Oh, yeah.
experiences,
Yeah.
adversity.
Childhood,
Yeah.
okay.
And they talked about it at length. I mean, yeah,
Only that one.
yeah.
We spent when I served on the council, we talked a lot about the effects of COVID and COVID funding. And in the statement of work, it clearly says that they had to present long, short-term goals with reference to COVID funding, awareness of COVID funding. Did any of these three have a particular ability to elevate that or make that something that we need to pay attention to on Monday about comparative logic? Or did all three address it well enough to know that that's not a differing point.
Yeah, I don't have my copies here. I know that they did address COVID and the short-term and also some of the long-term impacts of COVID. But do y'all remember specifically what was, Terrence, do you remember?
I was going to say, this is another one of those topics that push the public consulting group
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
to the forefront was their articulation of that.
About
So they all addressed it. They all met the criteria, but you could kind of read between how it was more thought or, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but it was definitely better articulated and it sounded sound. Somebody used the word sound. Their explanation of it came across as sound.
Any other questions from the negotiation team members for the evaluation team members?
This is not a question, but it is a point. You know, one of the dreams I have for the council of the future is to have that rich environment where entities who don't do well in responding to asks or proposals can come and get trained and get educated and get shown examples of high quality responses. And you guys have had such laudatory comments made about some of these proposals. I think they're worth holding on to and thinking about building a library of this is how you respond. This is what a quality response looks like. I've often, because I've done contracting for almost 30 years now, I always worry about people who have never read the ITN and send something in. It's like when you advertise for a job, you just get resumes, but they never realized what the job was about. You can so clearly tell when people put in effort, but you can also tell when people are resource poor and they do the best they can, but they couldn't possibly ever win because they don't have that environment to submit from. And I hope that we use these procurements and all the other procurements we're going to do in the future to sort of build a network of expertise on how to be competitive and build that talent in all those organizations. that are
Walter, I do
suffering that.
think there were some in here, KPMG. I might have even put last, I don't remember, it was terrible, but it's not that they didn't have the resources. It may have been the time issue. Because there's no excuse for them to have done as poorly
I
as
think
they
it was
did.
time. I think, I know this is recorded, you know, but I just think it was, let me just give them something and turn it in and call it a day, you know, and I felt a sense of arrogance, like, you know, I'm not going to spend the time to give you a quality proposal. And, you know, and I felt like I could have watched a movie, you know, instead of sitting, you know, so that's what bothered me. It was just, if you're going to do this, put the effort into really, you know, if you're not going to put the effort in, just don't do it. I prefer that they not respond than to have submitted so poorly. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll put this on the record. There were small wins that were missed. You know, very small wins that were missed on some of the proposals. They had the resources, but small wins. Formatting, stick with the theme,
Yes.
grammar, very small wins were some of the things. I thought maybe I'm being too critical, but no, I wasn't. I mean, you looked at some of the other ones, and so there were, again, that was my biggest thing reading them. So many small wins missed that could have likely propelled you to a higher score.
Yeah.
But there was no way you could give them any give and take based on some of the things that they submitted.
So just as a reminder for this, since this meeting is closed, it's closed because it's negotiation team strategy. So we just probably want to keep on track with the negotiation team.
Yeah, and
strategy.
going back to that, we did not talk price yet. And price is obviously a consideration. There are 3 different prices listed on the document we received, and I'm sure the budgetary structures as advised by our evaluation team members need to be reviewed and looked at and talked about on Monday. But we haven't talked about a strategy around price and how we're going to negotiate price, and if that's going to be saved for best and final, or if that's going to be a big debate point on Monday.
Yeah. I don't know how everybody else feels about it. you know, what, honestly, I was looking to see, they knew exactly what our budget was. Were they able to provide me a reasonable response within the amount of money that we had allocated? And if they were able to do that, then I was fine. And I, you know, I think one point of that I do want to look at is when we look at the time, the amount of time that these, you know, the proposals are saying that they need to be able to do the work and the amount of effort. So I want to know, you know, like just to the point that you said earlier, how are you justifying the dollars if you have a minimal amount of effort involved with this? But I think that we weaned out a lot of the ones that had a minimal effort. And I do think that the ones here did kind of justify the amount of effort that they were going to put into it. So I don't know if anybody else wants to expand on that, but yes, Ted.
2 points. One to that is I know there's been discussion with regard to subcontracting, and there's a buffer on a couple of them that don't have subcontracting within their proposals, which provides them a buffer to do some subcontracting for the community engagement, if that's where y'all head. And number two, something that you mentioned, Mr. Sachs, one of the things that y'all have talked about and we've thought about a lot is capacity building. And one of the things that is not in the informative programs inventory, it asks them to look around the country and document it effectively regarding the emergency practice on outcomes and measures, but it doesn't address capacity building. So it may be that y'all want to add into that program inventory national best practices. What are best practices with regard to capacity building within communities for programs like that?
It's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that on Monday, if we have a allowable, reasonable, necessary question, you know, we look at their budget, we see that they're paying for alcohol for some party.
Right.
We got to raise our hand and say, well, we're not going to pay for that.
Absolutely.
But, or if the gift cards are so extreme that we just can't stomach the volume, we can ask questions about that, but that's not going to drive Monday. The BAFO will probably be more aligned with the price than anything else.
I agree. I think all of them stayed within the budget, except for one that the lowest scoring one, it was the highest priced one, believe it or not.
It
I know.
still didn't explain no work.
I know. But
On financial terms, just
Yes.
because it might come up, because we published the draft contract after their proposals were submitted, so they didn't get distracted by it. That's the first time where we publicly signaled that we were looking for a fixed price contract.
Okay.
So that, if I put myself in their shoes, if I was thinking, you know, cost plus or time and materials or something, and I did my budget or I did my proposal that way, it might be significant to me to know that the, you know, council's expecting fixed price. So that might come up. So I don't know if you all want to, my recommendation is that it be a fixed price contract, and that's how we drafted the contract, but that's certainly something for the team and ultimately the council to decide when it comes to money, right, Walter? Because that's how you structure the deal is something that's negotiable.
I assumed it was fixed price. That was just my assumption. But hold on, Holly, did you need to say something? Okay, we'll go to Holly.
I just want the negotiation team to know that when we shared that with them, so it wasn't that we just published it and put it on our website, we actually emailed it and to each of the respondents so that they had it. And we did advise that, that should they have any questions, that they could come to the negotiations with that. So when thinking about our time frame, having them reserve those questions to the second time period that we're with them, I just want to see if the council's okay with, or the team is okay with that. So that when we communicate them expectations for Monday, when we communicate expectations for Monday, that it's very clearly stated that any of those contract questions that they might come forward would be reserved for the second period of time that we're with them. Everyone's nodding, so I think we're good. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Oh, these, right, I did not. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. And
It's also posted on our website. I'm sure.
yes, absolutely.
A quick question is, what's the process for communicating between now and Monday about what we want them to prepare for?
In terms of with the actual vendors themselves?
Yeah.
Yes, we will be communicating them. The three of us will be meeting to clarify what the expectations are, communicating the questions for what they need to prepare for that.
Based on what we talked about.
That is correct. So they will get an email probably this evening, just so I can have that checked off, but depending upon staff, it might be tomorrow morning.
And what I would recommend, and it's important because of the sunshine issue. So this negotiation team, Holly is the point of contact. So you can't communicate with one another, team members. But since you will not have read the proposals until this evening or tomorrow, I would expect you might come up with questions or ideas for Monday. And Holly, I think we should have a process for those to be communicated from each of the team members to you. And then we can have an exercise, tomorrow afternoon where we, digest that and then see if that leads to any communication. Again, I'm a big fan of controlling the agenda. Lawyers would be like the hot bench. So I'll let you say, may it please the court, but I'm going to jump right in.
Yeah.
So I would not give them, hey, you have the first 15 minutes of our 35-minute meeting. They can do a presentation because there is value and you want to see how they are as people and whatnot. But I would recommend that you dictate the agenda to them. So don't just give me a present. If you want to hear a verbal presentation of the proposal, that's up to you.
No.
I would ask for that, but if you want to hear something else, I would ask for very specifically, you got 5 minutes to introduce your team and then 10 minutes to answer these questions and let that be their presentation.
And I do think that's the communication that, right, okay, so, right. So,
But then you need to come up with the questions.
okay.
You need to come up with the questions because they're speaking to you. So it could be like, what are the project risks and how would you address them? It could be if, I need to hear you say more about effective community engagement. I would give them the top 3 things that you can read what they've written. I want to hear from you on these 3 topics and give those same 3 topics to each of them. And that'll give you a sense of how they speak to that agenda. But I would highly recommend that you drive the agenda.
Well, that was my question. So do you already have from this conversation what you're ready to send to them to ask for, or do we need to?
I have 4 questions that I drafted that I can send to the group before we submit that communication. We'll do that this evening. So it allows you to kind of weigh in. Don't reply all, just reply singularly, and then staff will convene that so that we won't send that communication until tomorrow.
And then what do we want to tell them about the presentation part?
I'll draft all of that for you if it's the will of the council. I have kind of a set standard for that already kind of drafted that I'll share with the group.
So
And then do we have a chance for them to read the proposals and then say, oh, and ask them this?
Right. So what I would like to do to the council is letting them know which ones were chosen to move forward and which ones have not been invited to do an in-person interview so that they get that communication. Although I'm sure some of them are watching and they know that, so that they at least have some communication, but that we will provide clarity on the full process expected for Monday, including timelines, so that they have some communication with an expectation that there's going to be clarity provided tomorrow, which would then allow each of you to download this evening, glance over. I don't know if thoroughly digest before you leave the questions, because I would like to give the team as much of Friday and the entire weekend that they can to prepare whatever their presentation, response, et cetera.
So it seems to me the one thing that we might do here as a group, and it may not take but a minute or two, is what do we want to give them, if anything, as a presentation time?
Presentation time or question?
Presentation time. Do we want to give them, let them know that they will have 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever we're going to say?
we decided that, right?
We did decide that?
Yes, ma'am. I can grab my notes and
That's
repeat it
okay.
back.
As long as we've decided it.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay.
Yeah, just to be clear, so I had it was 35 minutes for the whole thing. So that would be 15 minutes for a presentation.
It's a 5-minute intro, 15-minute presentation, 15-minute negotiation. And then there's 5 minutes for them to switch out. Then we do 5-minute intro, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes to switch out,
Okay.
5-minute intro, 15, 15.
Okay.
That's
And
3 hours. I mean, that
Okay,
works
that's
out,
12:05, yeah.
that works out
And then we
actually
have lunch.
perfectly.
And then everybody gets 40, I believe it's
45.
45 minutes in the afternoon.
Okay, I'm sorry I made everybody repeat
No,
that.
that's okay. Clarity is good.
So, but I would say in that 15 minutes, are you prepared now to make sure Polly and Pat and me hear what you want them?
Yeah, that's what I'm about to go through right
Yeah.
now. So these are the things that I captured from our conversation today. And please make sure if there's anything that I missed, I want to add. So we wanted to really stress them about the project governance documents, and will they commit to fleshing that out within the first 2 weeks of the contract? And we want to know specifically, how will they manage the contract and who or how they will be working with us to set those expectations. So I have that, something that we need to include. Another question, especially from Liza, who specifically is going to be doing the work? As a part of this, we know that they have all these SMEs and experts and all that stuff that they outline, but specifically who will we be engaging with? The next one is we just want them to confirm or verify that they will be able to meet the deadline for the expedited funding, and just emphasize that and stress that that is something that's very important to this committee. Commissioner Cummings, this is specifically for you, but just to get a verbal confirmation, look me in the eyeballs and confirm that this is something that you're going to do. To set the expectation that payment will be based on deliverables and not based on a time frame. So they understand that when this deliverable is submitted, that's when you get paid for this particular thing. Let's see, what else do I have here? Community engagement. We want to dig deep into the level of community engagement. How do they plan to engage with the different populations in a very authentic way? So however we fund that. The size of the organization. So confirm, especially for the smaller organizations that are part of this, how are they going to be able to get this work done given what they are offering to do and the amount of staff that they have to do it. So I have that as a question we want to dig into. Another thing I want us to be able to address the timeline for the council. Like these are the things that we need to do. So revisit the timeline with them to make sure that their deliverables are in line and make sure that they can agree to that to be able to give us what we need to make the timely decisions that we need. Let's see, what else do I have? Have a conversation with them about the outcomes and measures. The fact that that was a 14-day deliverable, how do they plan and expect to meet that expectation? Can they do that? If not, then we need to negotiate or have a conversation with them about readjusting that timeline. The 45, what did I say?
Yeah, 14.
Oh, gosh, I have 40, I'm staring right at 45.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
for the presentation part, I think you've hit on all the ones that I had for the presentation part, not giving all of those in advance, but rather that's guiding all the questions that you will be communicating throughout the period of time. I definitely had the responding to the revised timeline that we will provide them, extending the expected period from 5 months to a potential 6 to 8 months. So I had that listed. Authentic community engagement specifically, I had on there who, talking about the team and who specifically would be doing the work,
Sure.
and how that really does impact community engagement. And then the only one that I had for giving them in advance was your top 3 perceived risks of this project and how you anticipate to mitigate them.
Okay.
That's what I was going to propose in the follow-up document for what we give them in advance. All of the other pieces that you've listed, I believe it's the intention of the group to cover all of those throughout the negotiation, not necessarily to give them in advance.
So when would we then drop in these nuggets from others like ACEs or credit gift cards? Does that happen in the afternoon? I mean,
So I think part of that's the authentic community engagement and how we frame that question. We want you to dive deep in how you do that and providing those, and then you'll be able to do those clarifying questions in the negotiation.
Right, because this is a 15-minute presentation. There's no way they're going to be able to cover all those topics in any great detail. So I would give them 3 to 5 topics and say, you got 5 minutes for the intro, and I would include in the intro who's going to do the work. Like,
Right.
I want to know the people who are going to do the work, put that in those 5.
Well, I think Walter's intro was sort of ground setting. I mean, it wasn't an intro of their proposal, or was the first 5 minutes?
Intro of the people.
Intro the team.
Yeah, intro of the team.
Intro of the team.
No,
Yeah,
the,
for
the,
Jenny.
the 5 minutes when everybody sits down is Dr. Glenn.
Yeah.
Welcoming them, introducing us to them, them
Okay.
introducing us to them.
That's
It's
us
like
to them.
establishing who the lead negotiator is from both sides. You got to get that off the table first. You got to set the environment, and then they go into their presentation.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would say in the presentation, authentic community engagement, perceived risk and how you're going to tackle them, and the revised
Timeline.
Yep,
and
that's what,
deliverable. And if you just set it up, that gives them parameters, but that way each of them is singing off the same sheet of music. So you'll be able to judge, compare apples to apples kind of
Okay.
for that first 15 minutes anyway.
And then can we, excuse me, can we set very specific questions for the individual responders that we want them to be able to specifically answer? So like for George Washington, I realized it when, they really talked a lot about their strengths around health, but, their ability to transfer that to the other areas. Do we have a separate list of questions that are only for them and when do we ask those questions? After their presentation or in the 45-minute segment afterwards?
I would definitely do them after, so you have the homogeneous scripted presentation that's for all of them.
Right?
I'm a fan of, if I know I have a question, I give it in advance because I want a well-considered answer, because they'll answer it on the fly, or they'll answer, or we don't have time to get back to me with the answer. So if we want an answer that they're not just making up on the spot, I would give them the question in advance. And then, say, look, here's, when we get to our Q&A, these are the kind of questions we're going to answer, and we're giving them to you as a courtesy to, get ready. We can come up with other questions, but we think we're going to talk about these. Don't put these in your presentation,
Right.
but be prepared to address these questions. That you can do that if you want. If you want to see how they respond when you spring a question on them, to see how they deal with, stress and surprise, you could not give it to them in advance. It's really up to you.
Oh, and Mr. Green, Mr. Jones, not Mr. Green, Mr. Jones specifically pointed out a idea about using local subcontractors to do that local community engagement, known entities that people feel comfortable talking to. That's sort of a generic question to all three, could be in the Q&A later, that they all know is coming, that they may not even have thought about.
Right.
And if they're not prepped for that, they wouldn't even know how to answer it in a, it's not something we're trying to jump on them, but let's let them give them some thought to it.
Yep.
Good point.
They may think it's not a good idea because it might be a conflict of interest.
Mhm.
I don't, there may be a reason they didn't choose that, but that gives them some chance to think that through.
I believe our timeline accommodates for that, so that if we were to give them the 3 questions for their presentation and then say, we will follow up with any additional clarity, later today, tomorrow, whatever it might be, so that they can be thinking about those questions. The way that we've laid it out would accommodate that. So if we can all agree on those 3. I'm so sorry, Commissioner.
No,
That's
no,
okay.
no.
That's
My
fine.
question was answered.
It was
It was
answered.
answered.
Okay.
Mhm.
good. All
Thank
right.
you.
I just saw her trying.
Thank
to
you.
ask.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Sounds good.
So engaged in
And I
the
hope-
conversation.
Absolutely.
So this is going to bother me all weekend if I don't ask this question. I don't know how to think. I'm still struggling on how to think about price when there's, what is it, $50,000 different? Don't?
Wait for the BAFO.
Mhm.
Yep.
Wait for the BAFO.
Yeah,
We
because
will address this.
we're potentially going to change the playing field
Okay.
and ask them to submit a best and final offer. And price will be in there.
And it will be,
That's
and it
when
will
we
be
need
more
to get
equal.
into
It
it.
will be more balanced.
Well, it should be relevant to the ask.
Yeah.
Right? So if we notice a weakness in their proposal tied to cost, we should identify that on Monday. I can't connect the dot between this cost and this activity. So please explain that. That's
Okay.
good for Monday.
Good, okay.
But on Tuesday, when we're reading the BAFOs, I can't believe we're gonna do that in one day, but okay. And make a decision. But on Tuesday, that's when any kind of price discriminations between the two might be the difference between A and B.
Yep.
They might be everything equal except for price. That may be why we pick somebody. They're equally valued, but hey, this guy can do it for 50 grand cheaper.
Okay. Anything else?
Fred, was I out of line with?
Got any
give up.
questions? You got
No, at the end of the day, again, that's the ITM process, and it's not the low price wins. And when you're making the award decision and it's articulated, if you think there's the higher price and it's justified because there's clearly a better offer,
Right.
then that's within your authority to make that recommendation.
Completely agree. Okay, we're losing members. Ms. McFadden, do you have to leave?
Well, I kind of sense we were.
We're wrapping up. We definitely are wrapping up. Okay, I completely agree.
Anticipatory
Okay.
departure.
Okay, once again, I think everybody has the dates on your calendar for the negotiations team. I want to make sure y'all just be ready. All day Monday, we will be at the library. BAFO, I just never heard that terminology before, but I think it's great. Okay, so that will be Tuesday from 9 to 1 at the Florida Department of Children's and Families, and then
9 to
11. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
You're right, 9 to 11.
And Ms.
That's,
Cannon will be letting you in. She'll be there to meet you. By the way, I've talked to Denise.
Yeah, that's
So-
2383 Phillips Road. If you've never been there, it's close to FDLE out Miccosukee.
Phillips
that
and
way,
Miccosukee.
Across from CMS. over
Just
there.
off Blairstone is our.
Yeah, Blairstone and Miccosukee area.
There's
Yes.
down in Miccosukee. Okay, all right. And then we meet again on the 14th from 1 to 3 here in the chambers to determine who we are going to recommend for the council on the 21st. So just making sure everybody has that.
I don't think I have a meeting invite for the 14th. I think it was an email, but I don't think I got a calendar invite. For
I'll
the
send it to you.
14th. But thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then can we, Holly, your timeline, like questions, any
Yep.
feedback from the evaluators based on your reading, if you can read them in the morning, and whatever it is,
Sure.
and then communicate with Holly by noon? Is that?
So she's going to initiate what her draft to them is and we'll respond. That's
So based on there will be kind of a draft communication with those 3 that you've identified for them to prepare for their presentation. It's for the additional questions for the second communication that would go out to each of the vendors. So that could include very specific items. Maybe it's the George Washington question or the incentives question, whatever it might be. So if you have those specific ones, we'll collate all of them. But again, please do not reply all. Send them directly to myself and Ted.
So if I wanted to ask that ACES question, for example, I should go on and suggest that to you as advance notice.
Yes.
Do you have hard copies of the 3 proposals we've got to look through?
So you have access to them. And so we have not printed them for you, but you have that invitation for you right now. Do I have?
Yeah, I'm saying, do you guys have hard copies? I see everybody have hard copies.
So we only requested each of the vendors to submit 1 hard copy. And so all the copies you see and what they're turning in are actually score sheets. They would have printed them themselves.
He'll sell
Buy a
his, though, I'll
toner.
bet you for a price.
He'll sell me his.
I did send it to your aide and encouraged him to maybe prepare it for you. We were messaging.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Is everybody comfortable? Negotiations team members, are y'all ready, comfortable for this?
When you're reading, read the service description, because again, that's at this stage, that's what's most relevant to the contract. So there's some material in there for, background and whatnot. I think you can rely on the
So you said the service provision, is that what you
the
said?
service
Service
description,
restriction.
section D of the ITN, because
Okay.
that's the one that's going to feed most directly into the contract. The rest of the stuff, I think you can rely on all the effort that the evaluation team put into, this is a good
Experience.
company and
Yeah.
this, that, and the other thing.
Yep,
But if you really want to get the most out of your time, focus on that, because that's
Okay.
what's going to be the big part of the contract.
Okay,
That's
Great.
true. Yeah, very good. Okay, everybody. If
Well
that
done.
concludes this, then I am now adjourning this meeting. Thank you all so very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Watts?
We made it.
to the evaluator.
We survived it. Survived. Thanks.
Oh.